Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down the Two Towers. I'm so happy to be doing the second entry in what I think's the greatest trilogy of all time. Building off the back of the brilliant works by Tolkien, The Two Towers is an absolute masterpiece. Throughout this video we're going to be going through the movie and alongside it also breaking down the book. This will contain all the Easter eggs, hidden details and extra bits of trivia that make the movie precious to me. I don't want to waste any more of your time though, so with that out of the way, let's get into the video while you swear on the precious to hit the thumbs up.
So it begins.
Now when we went over the Fellowship of the Ring, you might remember we talked about Jackson's deal with Miramax. Originally they were planning on just making 2 movies, with the initial scripts being written just for that. It was only when Jackson got out the deal and signed up with New Line that they realised they needed a 3-part epic. However, they still had a lot of the work done on the scripts, and thus Jackson didn't initially have one for Two Towers. Instead, we were just going to get Fellowship, and then it would culminate in the War of the Ring. Now because of that, The Two Towers is the most different to its book out of the 3 films. There's even vast chapters that when doing my notes for it, I just wrote Return of the King, just so when we get to that movie I can then go back to these, but you don't care. Certain elements in it are either made up entirely or they've been shifted about to add certain scenes to this. If you've read the book, then you'll know it actually begins with Boromir's death, which Jackson placed at the end of Fellowship. The walk scene was also originally in Fellowship, which we talked about in our breakdown for that. This is something that happens after they fail to scale Caradhras, and it forces them to journey into the mines. Aragorn also ends up seemingly falling to his death, with this entire subplot being completely made up. This also comes along with Osgiliath, which is something the hobbits don't visit.
By rights, we shouldn't even be here.
Which is a line I love that Jackson threw in there. Throughout, we'd also see a vision where the ring corrupted Frodo and he transformed much like how Gollum did. I felt this scene was done better in Return of the King though, so it makes sense to just not repeat the motif. Removing this moment though makes this the only film in the trilogy where no one wears the ring. Arwen also gets way more character development, and we see her going back and forth with her father. Originally, she was in the Battle of Helm's Deep, with her deciding to mount up and join the elves. If you go and look at the footage, you can see her, or well, her presence at 2 key moments. As they're running up into the keep, you can notice her on the stairs just before they make their final stand. Now, I say her presence because Weta forgot to paint her out this moment. However, they did paint her out of the moment just before this, where you can catch them running up the bridge. If you zoom in and look closely at Aragorn's shadow, you'll see there's another one that isn't actually attached to a person. That is Arwen's, with them only removing Liv Tyler and not the shadow she left. When they were reworking the script, they decided to play the romance differently and instead have the pair interacting through flashbacks. So we get an added scene where she and Aragorn spend some time together at Rivendell the night before the Fellowship's departure. In the book, the story of Aragorn and so on also ends with Gandalf riding to Minas Tirith after Pippin's looked into the Palantir. Frodo and Sam's story ends with the Battle of Shelob and then Frodo being taken by the orcs. That's all stuff that happens in Return of the King, and thus you can see how they kind of shifted stuff about. We will go more in depth on these other altered moments as we get into them, but most of the work was rearranged to fit this. It even got to the point they were considering just distancing themselves from the work as much as possible due to the events of September 11th. You have to remember, the movie released in 2002, meaning we had just over a year since the attack. They stuck with it in the end, though Jackson changed what the Two Towers were. In the book, they were Minas Smeagol and Orthanc, whereas Jackson had them as Orthanc and then Barad-dûr. Whereas the movies told with the stories happening alongside each other, the source material splits things into 2 books. The first of these is following Aragorn and the gang, whereas the second half is just all about Frodo. Because of that, I've written stuff like this happens in chapter 18, whereas in the book it's like book 2 chapter 7. That just means it's the 18th chapter of the book though, and so I'm not having a nightmare jumping back and forth between chapters. Now this is a long way of saying there's a lot of stuff in the movie that isn't in the work, which we see immediately in the opening scene. Journeying back to the Misty Mountain, we pick up with Gandalf's apparent death. We're using shots from the Fellowship, and when the Eagle transported him from Isengard, we then pick up with his battle with the Balrog. However, as we follow the Fellowship last time, here we go down the dark, dusty cavern. The book tells us this battle lasted 10 days and worked from the pits up to the mountain tip. Now when watching this for the first time in the theatre, I was absolutely blown away by them opening opening up the movie like this. Shoutouts to IMDb Trivia for pointing out that this fall lasts for about 71 seconds. Terminal velocity is about 53 meters a second, meaning they fell for about 4,000 meters. Great little fact there, and I think next to The Spy Who Loved Me, this is my favorite way to start a movie ever, which also has a big moment involving falling. New Line originally wanted to open it up with a prologue which would recap the events from last time. However, Jackson just wanted to throw us right into the action and argued that people would remember what happened. Ironically, New Line were the ones who were against his prologue and Fellowship, and I feel in both cases that Jackson was completely right. I love the way we follow Gandalf into the chasm and go all the way down with him right into the depths. Though the compositing of him under the CGI Balrog, it looks a bit off these days, back then this was taking things to the next step. Not only was it using camera techniques we hadn't really seen before, but you also had a real actor fighting a giant CGI character. This is further improved upon with Gollum later in the movie. Though CGI characters had been in films before, this felt like the next step in believability. Now, they initially just wanted a CGI character, which is what they used in the prologue of Part 1. Originally, Andy Serkis was just supposed to do the voice work, but Jackson was blown away by his audition. Thus, he decided to cast him in the movie, and Serkis has led the way for motion capture performances. I really believe that he should have got an Oscar, and though Jackson pushed for it, the Academy rejected it due to Gollum being CGI. It was a big moment for James Cameron though, who after seeing Gollum realised the tech was there to make Avatar. I still think it's the perfect way to start the movie, and it allows us then to transition perfectly to Frodo. Gandalf! This also mirrors his cries in Moria. Gandalf! Now, how Frodo is able to see this was touched upon more in the Fellowship book. There, we actually saw Gandalf's escape from Sarumon through Frodo dreaming of it. At Lothlorien, we learn the rings are able to peer into the mind of other ring bearers, which is why Sauron invented the others. Gandalf was bound to the ring Narya, and he became its final wearer. Now, though the book explains the 3 elven rings are hidden from the one, it's possible that Gandalf could still send a message. At Rivendell, when Frodo said how he saw him in a dream, Gandalf said, "Then it was late in coming." Gandalf was potentially trying to contact the other ring bearers, which at this point would have included Galadriel and Elrond. So you could see Frodo as intercepting this dream, but let me know below if you have a different theory. Now we begin with the 11th chapter in the book, which is called The Taming of Smeagol. When you're reading the work, it acts as a great tonal shift as we're going from the big war stuff in Rohan to a stealthier approach. Well, Master, we're in a fix and no mistake, is how we begin, and it instantly sets the mood. Now through the book we learn it's been 7 nights since leaving the Fellowship and that they've spent 3 lost in Emyn Muil alone. The second paragraph of Taming Smeagol explains how they could find no way forward and sometimes discovered they'd wandered in a circle to the same point they were at hours before.
It's because we've been here before. We're going in circles.
Now, in the book, it's at this point we get the line, "That's the one place in all the lands we've ever heard of that we don't want to see any closer. And that's the one place we're trying to get to."
The one place in Middle-earth we don't want to see any closer. It's the one place we're trying to get to.
However, the work also lets us delve into Frodo's inner thoughts and all of his worries as he goes through the landscape. Getting lost here, Frodo says every choice he's made has seemed to be the wrong one. He even wonders if the Dark Tower or the ring has some influence on him. At this point, they also say they haven't seen Gollum for 2 nights, but deep down they know he's still following. Sometimes in the silence of that barren country, they fancied that they heard faint sounds behind them, a stone falling, or the imagined step of flapping feet on the rock. But if they halted and stood still listening, they heard no more, nothing but the wind sighing over the edges of the stones. Yet, even that reminded them of breath softly hissing through sharp teeth. Now in the extended edition, we get a scene with the rope which Sam had forgotten about until now. In the book, this actually helps in navigation as the silver gleam on it shines through the mist. Frodo at one point gets lost in the rocks, but the little light from it helps guide him back. This is after he falls, which is something we see happening in the scene. Grabbing a falling box, we learn my guy risked his life for some seasoning. Sam's kept it in case they have some roast chicken one night, and yeah, kinda shows his perception of what's going on. However, I also feel like it highlights what he's fighting for, and that's a
little bit of home.
That's what this entire war's about, and they don't want to lose what makes them them. Now they then discuss the rope and talk about someone potentially following them. Sam at one point even measures it out and finds it's triple the length it looks. Elves are wonderful folk. It looks a bit thin, but it's tough, and soft as milk to the hand, and as light as light. It's in this scene that we see how it magically unravels even when tied with knots to a rock. In both the work and film, Sam ties it with just a pull. This rope's then used on Gollum, and it could add weight to why it burns him. Elves are pure creatures, so something that's had its life prolonged through dark means might have a distaste for it. This comes across everything the elves do, with Gollum even finding the lembas disgusting. Sam ends up completely distrustful of him, and even from the rope we see the splinter growing in his mind. Sam worries that the rope's gonna act as a signpost, which is why he's desperate to pull it from the rock. However, it of course comes down, and it allows the pair to escape Mule. We then see Frodo getting a flash of the eye, which is when he says,
It's getting heavier.
this is touched upon in the book, with the work saying, in fact, with every step towards the gates of Mordor, Frodo felt the ring on its chain about his neck grow more burdensome. He was now beginning to feel it as an actual weight dragging him earthward, but far more he was troubled by the eye, so he called it to himself. It was that, more than the drag of the ring, that made him cower and stoop as he walked. We see Frodo drinking from a flask while they eat lembas bread. I love how this is sort of reflected later with Merry and Pippin, who are forced to swill that oily orc stuff. Now it's at this point they realise that Gollum's stalking them. In the rain they notice him, and in the book we get some pretext before they spring their trap. Like a nasty crawling spider on a wall, down the face of the precipice. Sheer and almost smooth it seemed in the pale moonlight. A small black shape was moving with its thin limbs splayed out. Maybe its soft clinging hands and toes were finding crevices and holes that no hobbit could ever have seen or used, but it looked as if it was just creeping down on sticky pads, like some large prowling thing of insect kind. And it was coming down head first, as if it was smelling its way. Now in the work, the character was smelling because the elven cloaks hid the pair and made them practically invisible. This is something we see in full effect with the Easterlings when one investigates what the falling rocks are. This in the book is where we get the thieves line, which Circus delivers brilliantly in the film.
They're thieves. They're filthy little thieves.
Gollum also says,
My precious.
which is something he says 15 times in the film, and any Gollum impression comes equipped with it. I'll try not to do mine though. Climbing down the rocks, this is perfectly captured in the movie as we get our first proper look at Gollum. In this we get our first clue that he's a hobbit, as we can see he's got the same kind of oversized feet.
Oh, Botsto!
Now Gollum went through several redesigns, with him initially having a skeletal rotted away nose. However, they realised they needed to have him also be sympathetic, and looking like a zombie didn't really help. They do something really subtle with the character though, depending on what persona he's in. The more friendly version has much larger pupils, which makes it seem like he's almost got Disney eyes. The Wicked version's pupils are a lot smaller, which indicates what mood Gollum's in. His body language also adds massively to the mood. Friendly Gollum makes movements similar to a child, whereas the evil one's more hunched up, with Circus looking at what stances predators do before attacking their prey. Circus play the character like an addict, with him going through withdrawals and saying whatever he thinks will help him get a hit. You can see this in several moments, especially when he spots the ring. In case you missed our breakdown last time, we pointed out how Gollum puffs his cheeks out, which is also something Boromir did just before attacking Frodo. Basing his voice on a cat coughing up a furball, we get that iconic According to IMDb trivia, Circus is actually a very experienced rock climber, so this came in handy with a lot of his actions being on all fours. When modelling the character's arms, they actually looked at longtime Tolkien artist John Howe, who helped to inspire the character's wiry frame. Now when it comes to capturing the performance, the actor filmed 2 takes of every scene. The first of these would have Circus in acting in the motion capture suit. The second would have Elijah and Sam acting against nothing. The plan was then to have Circus reenact the scene on a green screen set in a studio, which Weta could then incorporate. However, the team at Weta found that pretty much every take was better when the actors did the scene with Circus. Thus Weta had a lot of work having to remove Circus from every shot and replace him with Gollum. The tech at the time, it also held them back a bit. It apparently took 4 hours to render just 1 frame, which they'd have set away overnight. However, this didn't always work out. According to the wiki, they'd sometimes arrive to find glitches, such as Gollum's hair standing up on end just like a punk rocker. This process was so arduous that Weta actually started working on one of the final shots first. This was the long take in which Gollum crawls along talking to himself about luring the hobbits to Shelob. Lasting 2 minutes, it required months and months of work, which included Circus filming the entire thing again on a green screen. Took ages to render, and yeah, you can see why they had to do this thing first. Now the fighting conversation that follows brings the book to life perfectly. Sam was out of his hiding in a flash and crossed the space between him and the cliff foot in a couple of leaps. Before Gollum could get up, he was on top of him, but he found Gollum more than he bargained for. Then sharp teeth bit into his shoulder. All he could do was butt his hard round head sideways into the creature's face. Gollum hissed and spat, but he did not let go. Now it's at this point that Frodo springs up and draws Sting from its sheath. The basis for this shot actually came from an Alan Lee painting, and it's one of the more famous illustrated Lord of the Rings images. With his left hand, he drew back Gollum's head by his thin lank hair, stretching his long neck and forcing his pale venomous eyes to stare up at the sky. "Let go, Gollum," he said. "This is Sting. You've seen it before, once upon a time. Let go, or you'll feel it this time. I'll cut your throat." Which plays into this line in the movie.
This is Sting. You've seen it before. Release him, or I'll cut your throat.
It's one of the most book-accurate parts of the movie, and in both the book and film, we see as the characters move switches just like the attic circus portrayed him as. He stood over Gollum while Sam tied the knot. The result surprised them both. Gollum began to scream, a thin, tearing sound very horrible to hear. He writhed and tried to get his mouth to his ankle and bite the rope. He kept on screaming. I love the transition there, and you really get the feeling he's been doing that all day. Paying close attention to his pupils there, you can also notice they widen as the more sympathetic side takes over.
He's so ugly! I love him!
Now over time, we get the idea that Frodo pities him and thinks back to his talk with Gandalf. That is, of course, how some who deserve life get death, and some who deserve death get life, but Gandalf's words came with a warning. He told Frodo to not be so quick to be a person that deals death out, and thus he ends up pitying the character.
Maybe he does deserve to die, but now that I see him, I do pity him.
Now in freeing him, they agree that one good turn deserves another, and he agrees to lead them out. However, the work expands on their time with the character and how that first night they pretend to be asleep. As soon as they close their eyes, Gollum makes a run for it, and in the end they make him swear on the precious, which is a section that comes directly from the book. However, in order to swear, they say the oath.
Say the line, Bart!
One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. For a moment, it appeared to Sam that his master had grown and that Gollum had shrunk. A tall, stern shadow, a mighty lord who hid his brightness in grey cloud, and at his feet a little whining dog. Yet the two were in some way akin and not alien. They could reach one another's mind. It's in this moment that he talks about his secret path, which involves going through the marshes. Described as leading them like a dog, we close out this first section with them looking out over the leagues before them and witnessing a dark and black silence. It's a chilling way to end the first chapter with them, and in the movie we then see the other two hobbits are a little worse for wear. Taking us to the second chapter of the work, that is the Riders of Rohan. This vast and expansive part of the movie centers around the rescue of Merry and Pippin. However, it escalates into something else and ends up becoming one of the biggest battles put to film. Until Return of the King, we begin with a company of Uruk-hai, some of which were voiced by Andy Serkis. It's the first time we get to see things from their point of view, and we also get the infighting that happens in the group. Now the work explains where this all stems from and really goes into detail over why this happens. The orcs and Uruk-hai are loyal to different masters, with the allegiances split between Sauron and Sarumon. That's something we don't really get hammered home, but they fight over what direction to take the ring. One detail I love finding in my research is something they do with the Uruk-hai. You might notice that some of them have grey hair, and there's also heavy blotches on their skin. This was supposed to show they were rotting and falling apart.
Ew.
They were of course made by Saruman, and it's great how they added these little touches in. Casting them though was a bit of a nightmare, as they're all supposed to be 7 foot tall. After running out of 6 foot extras, they went down to 5'5" guys and just had them hanging around the back, and they nicknamed them the Uruk-hai. Now they take most of the scene from the following chapter titled the Uruk-hai. This opens by saying Pippin lay in a dark and troubled dream in which he's calling out for Frodo. He's then swarmed by hundreds of orcs, which wakens him quickly from the nightmare. It's a great way to open up the chapter, and of course reflects the dream that Frodo had of Gandalf. The orcs then arrive at 1515 and they join the company of Uruk-hai. However, there's already fractures, with them both being loyal to different masters. Now in this chapter we follow Merry and Pippin, with the former being a a little worse for wear. Ugluk thrust a flask between his teeth and poured some burning liquid down his throat. He felt a hot, fierce glow through him. The pain in his legs and ankles vanished. He could stand. Now, one said it was decided that the orcs shouldn't have pink mouths due to their blood being black, so they used licorice-based mouthwash here to make the insides of their mouths look darker. We then get the line in the work about how he can't take his medicine, which is something they bring across to the film.
God take his blood!
What I love about Dominic Monaghan's performance here, though, is that you can really see him trying to stay strong. The book describes him as looking pale but grim and defined, and they imagine Strider racing behind them.
Don't worry about me.
And that takes us to the second chapter, which follows Aragorn and the gang. The chapter itself starts off saying how dusk deepened and we catch Aragorn and co running, attempting to pick up the scent. In hindsight, going back to this chapter, I love they actually talk about the mist along Eamon Mule. That's what Frodo is currently caught in, and it's a great way to recontextualize their struggle. The work really goes into the thought process behind what goes into tracking them and how he surveys the land. Noticing a river, he realizes the orcs will avoid it due to them being scared of water. This means they're taking them to Isengard rather than taking them towards the clutches of Mordor.
They're taking the hobbits to...
Right, yeah, we get it, mate. We also have a section discussing how he cast himself upon the ground and listened intently, which is how we're reintroduced to him. It's in this tracking that they also come across 5 dead orcs, which begins a mystery in the chapter. Aragorn says it won't be the Rohirrim, as they don't typically journey into this area. In the work, we learn that he used to live among them and is aware of their ways. As we discover, though, he is indeed wrong, and the creatures were killed by the Riders of Rohan. Now, this is the first clue that something's off in Rohan and that the Riders aren't happy with their leader. As they run, the work also tells us some additional things. Legolas spots a giant eagle far away and wonders if it's the one he's seen in the past. The text tells us that this was rescuing Gandalf. I'm guessing Jackson didn't include it because he didn't want another film where the eagles fly in and sort everything out. If he had, that would have been like all 3 in the original trilogy, and then I think they popped up in 2 in The Hobbit. Either way, it just adds a little more context and explains how Gandalf got down from the mountain. Now, this is where Aragorn asks Legolas to use his elf eyes. The book tells us of a great company, but the movie birthed one of the best memes ever.
They're taking the hobbits to Isengard! They're taking the hobbits to Isengard! They're taking the hobbits to Isengard!
This even got to the point where Bloom reacted to it while making The Hobbit.
To Isengard! To Isengard! To Isengard! To Isengard! To Isengard!
Now, you might wonder how they're able to catch up to the group so quickly. The work explains in the Departure of Boromir chapter that they packed as light as they could. Their shoes are also made from elven material, which means they're lighter on their feet. This is something we see in full effect at Helm's Deep when the army of elves arrive. You might notice that we don't hear the footsteps of them marching, and this is because they don't make a sound. Too bloody light, if you ask me, because if you pay close attention to Gimli at the 1744 mark, you'll see his shoe comes off as he's running. Didn't stop though, and everyone keeps on powering through. It's at this point in the book we then get the line, "The brooch of an elven cloak," cried Legolas and Gimli together. "Not idly do the leaves of Lorien fall," said Aragorn. "This did not drop by chance. It was cast away as a token to any that might follow. I think Pippin ran away from the trail for that purpose."
Not idly do the leaves of Lorien fall.
This was of course left behind him at the start of the scene, and I love how Jackson perfectly recaptures the work. There's so much atmosphere in it, including the language that Tolkien uses to chronicle a journey. The sun climbed to the noon and then rode slowly down the sky. Light clouds came up out of the sea in the distant south and were blown away upon the breeze. The sun sank. Shadows rose behind and reached out long arms from the east. Still, the hunters held on. We follow them day by day and the ins and outs of most of the trek. Eating lembas bread, this fills their stomach and gives them the energy to power through.
One small bite is enough to fill the stomach of a grown man.
They do hit a snag in the end of the road though when they realise these orcs travel through the day. Due to the genetic engineering by Sarumon, the company are more resistant to light. Legolas correctly guesses they'll travel in the night as well, but this will make the trail more difficult to follow. Thus in the book, when they wake up they worry they've lost them, whereas in the movie they have the red sky. Nothing can be heard though. "The rumour of the earth is dim and confused," he said. "Nothing walks upon it for many miles about us. Faint and far are the feet of our enemies. Loud are the hoofs of the horses. With no clear trail, this worries a ranger like Aragorn, yet still they push on. Now in the movie, it's at this point we cut to Saruman using the Palantir. Inside it is something similar to an eye to reflect Sauron's eye on top of the tower. These two towers were present in the poster as well, and I think they act as great ways to divide the two sides of the Fellowship. We have Frodo and Sam working towards taking down Sauron, while Aragorn gets Sarumon. We also get him saying,
The world is changing.
which reflects Galadriel saying this at the start of Fellowship.
The world is changed.
Now this video is sponsored by Isengard. Yes, the Isengard state media, they want you guys to know that Saruman's not all bad. If he gets the ring, we'll all get to live in the industrial land of Isengard. Just use my link in the description and use the code HAILSARUMON to get 50% off your Saruman Isengard membership today. And from here we get a reuse of some of the shots of the trees being torn down from Fellowship, which is brought in to highlight what Saruman's going to do next. Saruman wants to build a dam, and in the end this leads to his downfall. Having stripped the trees close to home, he's now turned his eyes to the forest of Fangorn. Fangorn Forest lies at the foot of the Misty Mountain and it spans past Isengard, Rohan and Lothlorien. The forest actually used to be much larger, but a vast part of it was destroyed during the Second Age. Both the Númenóreans and Sauron cut through it, but it still remains a vast piece of woodland. In these moments at the 20 minutes 30 mark, we also see blacksmiths creating swords. These were actually the real life blacksmiths from the production team who made the weapons and armor for the movie. We also see Saruman recruiting the wild men of Dunland. These were forced off their land by Rohan, and they've somewhat been forced to become barbaric savages. It's kinda like how the Germanic forces were depicted in Gladiator, with the men being loosely based upon them. The work actually tells us they were part of the Battle of Helm's Deep and that they aligned with the orcs due to Saruman's promises. Thematically, I feel this sort of aligns with Sauron the Deceiver. He too made promises, and I've no doubt that these men would have been betrayed at the end. As of this video though, we also know they're going to feature heavily in the upcoming War of the Rohirrim film. Haven't seen that as of putting this together, but that would probably discuss more of their backstory. Also, disclaimer, I still haven't watched Rings of Power Season 2. I know, I don't want it messing with my canon and making me misremember stuff because I've got like 3 massive novels stuffed in my head and I don't want to mess that up. Now the damage and devastation these men leave is something we witness as they ravage the landscape. Burning villages and forcing people from their homes, these end up fleeing. Amongst these we see some kids who are split from their mother and they later reunite at Helm's Deep. There's actually also a really subtle shot in the movie where we can see villages burning in the background, which I love Jackson added in. This is the Westfold, which is now burning because of the men. Now it's during this that we cut across to Éomer. My favourite bit of trivia about Karl Urban is that he and Viggo went and bought some Gundam figures when they visited Japan. We also have him discovering Theodred, aka Theoden's son. Though he's alive, he hasn't got long left for the world and his death really tears up Theoden. Later we get a line that's always stuck with me about how parents shouldn't bury their children. Bernard Hill actually put this in the film himself after he remembered speaking to a woman whose son had died. In her grief she said this to him and he got Jackson to include it for the character. It's really poignant, and Éomer has his sister Éowyn, who are now the only people looking out for the king's best interests. Now I had to double take the book when I was first reading it because Theoden calls her sister daughter. Getting a bit Game of Thronesy there, mate. You've even got a guy like Larys next to you. How that sister daughter is because Éowyn's his niece and he took her in after the death of her parents. This is why they have such a familial bond, but they don't delve too deeply into it. What it does though is allow for one of the film's themes to be set up. In this movie we meet Boromir's brother Faramir, with Theodred being a stand-in of the former. Denethor clearly saw Boromir as the favourite and wanted to leave him the keys to the kingdom, or regency. Theoden had this as well as his son, but he ended up dying. So you can feel a regret from losing his son, which also kind of explains why Denethor's a dick. Even though he's a dick, yeah, and Faramir's great, mate, you don't need to be a dick like that. Either way, when we first meet Theoden, he's in his aged and decrepit look. This took 9 hours to apply, with it being extremely convincing. Later on, we see the character de-age in real time, which was done through mostly practical means. Hill was given the full look for take 1, where he'd film the scene and then they'd yell cut. They'd then do another take where he had slightly less makeup and they'd then repeat the action. Doing this 4 times at different stages allowed them to get footage where they could morph the 4 takes together. there. Now, Bernard Hill was originally wanted for Gandalf, but I feel he's perfect as the king. Throughout this and the next movie, he gets one of the best arcs, and he played the character brilliantly. Sadly, he died in May earlier this year, with the actor being booked in to appear at Liverpool Comic-Con. This would be alongside Elijah Wood, Sean Astin, Billy Boyd, and Dominic Monaghan, who instead held the panel as an honour to his memory. Now, alongside him is Brad Dourif, who plays Grima Wormtongue. Always kills me that name, but this actually has deeper ties to Christian mythology. The word worm derives from the word worm with a Y, which means snake. The snake was present in the Garden of Eden, and it tempted Eve by offering her knowledge. This eventually led to man and woman losing out and being exiled from the Garden of Eden. Wormtongue uses his words to whisper in Theoden's ear to stop him from stepping up to stop evil. He also names Gandalf Lathspell, which translates to the bringer of ill news.
Lathspell I name him. Ill news is an ill guess.
Shoutouts to IMDb Trivia for noting this is the opposite of Jesus, who brought the gospel. The gospel translates to mean good news, so we have this being tied to his nickname. Gandalf was resurrected just like Jesus, and he's returned to lead man out of the darkness. So lots of things going on there, and Tolkien was of course a Christian. Now, Eomer set some things off because he discovered a white hand on the orcs. This is the marking of Sarumon, and thus he wants to warn the king. This falls on deaf ears though, and Eomer's banned from the kingdom. I love how Grima holds up the document, which is being signed by the king. The signature scrawls off almost like he didn't have control when he was writing it. Just subtly hints how out of it he is, and how he doesn't have the cognizance to make decisions like this. Now, Dourif completely nails it as Wormtongue, and I feel like whether it's intentional or not, this looks very similar to Gollum. He has the same pale skin and those big blue eyes, and it just reminds me a lot of the character. I did wonder if that was intentional, as both have been tempted by darkness. Dourif got sewn to the role that he even shaved his eyebrows, which over time sounds like a bit of a nightmare. Guy ended up shooting his parts spaced out over 3 years, so he had to cut them down 5 times. Nightmare. IMDb Trivia though states he stayed in character and spoke with a British accent in between takes. This was so convincing that Bernard Hill thought the American accent he started speaking with was fake. Guy absolutely kills it and is low-key one of the most memorable villains in the movie. We even see him lusting over Eowyn, and yeah, just a creepy dude. But he's in power at the moment, so he's the one who controls Rohan. Now, back with Merry and Pippin, we actually hear the Ents off in the distance.
What's making that noise? It's the trees.
This happens as the orcs cut down the tree, and it's what leads into Merry getting the idea to show the Ents Isengard. We also get this line, which is one of my favourite memes as well.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys!
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys! The hobbits are actually offered meat in the book, but they turn it down because they don't know what it is. I like how Jackson kind of answers that here, and it sort of paints them out as being cannibalistic. Now, the work tells us the Uruk-hai have orders, and that the halflings carry something that's wanted for the war.
An elvish weapon. The master wants it for the war.
It says in the book, alive and as captured, and no spoiling.
Alive and unspoiled.
Shouldn't have come to the heavy spoilers show then, eh? These are all moments that come from the book directly, and it shows how much Jackson respected the source material. We also learn the commander's called Ugluk, and no prizes for guessing that that's based on the word ugly. The smaller orc is called Grishnag, and the pair have a little fight. It's during this in the book that a blade is cast to the side that Pippin then uses to cut his rope. However, in the work, he doesn't escape at this point. He just loops his hands around his back and pretends to be a captive. In doing this, it allows him to drop the leaf, which of course he does in the movie. In the book, he realizes the orc tracks will be confusing and imagines Strider struggling to follow them. So he quickly dashes off the path to lay some footprints elsewhere that won't get trampled. Now, it's in this moment that the orcs notice a horseman who rides off to raise the alarm. However, due to the book expanding on our time with them, we actually learn what the next part of the journey is. A winged Nazgul awaits us northward on the east bank. Maybe, and you'll fly off with our prisoners and get all the pay and praise and lugbutts and leave us to foot it as best we can through the horse country. Doesn't say lugbutts, just the teleprompter hasn't read it, but I'm reading from the book, I promise, guys. No. We must stick together. These lands are dangerous, full of foul rebels and brigands. Now, this somewhat foreshadows the arrival at the Marshes, and the Nazgul feature a lot more in the book. Described as being like a secret weapon, the orcs say, you ought to know that they're the apple of the great eye. But the winged Nazgul, not yet. He won't let them show themselves across the great river yet. Not too soon. They're for the war and other purposes. Constantly throughout Frodo's journey, they talk about how they often spot shadows overhead. This happens as early as Em and Mule, with them noticing something black in the mist. Now in the movie, they cut that all down and just have the riders attack. However, they play things a lot differently in the work, and they don't just go straight for the ambush. The horses sometimes gallop past the group and do drive-bys on the orcs. Now in the night, Pippin realizes they're after the ring when Grishnak grabs him. Guy even does a Gollum impression. For a moment, Pippin was silent. Then suddenly in the darkness, he made a noise in his throat. Gollum. Gollum. You forced me to do that impression. Nothing, my precious, he added. I won't do any more Gollum impressions. Grishnak then says that he doesn't want the ring and how their torturer will get it out of them. It's at this point that Pippin says it'll be Sarumon who gets it, which is a name that enrages the orc. It all kicks off from this point, which is when the riders attack. Grishnak flung himself on the ground flat, dragging the hobbits under him. Then he drew his sword. No doubt he meant to kill his captives, rather than allow them to escape or be rescued. But it was his undoing. The sword rang faintly and glinted a little in the light of the fire away to his left. An arrow came whistling out of the gloom, and it pierced his right hand. He dropped the sword and shrieked. There was a quick beat of hoofs, and even as Grishnak leaped up and ran, he was ridden down and a spear passed through him. He gave a hideous, shivering cry and lay still. Now they drag this out a lot longer in the movie, with the orc following the hobbits into the forest. I do like it there though, as they use it as a way to introduce Treebeard, and it skillfully sets up how powerful the Ents are, which I prefer. Now again, the elven cloaks aid them in the book. It's said that the riders simply don't spot them because their garments are a camouflage. This also explains why in the movie Éomer doesn't really notice them. The pair escape though, which we discover through Aragorn's tracking, and they make it to the forest. In the work, they also talk about how they might end up as a chapter in Bilbo's book. This chapter then closes out describing the riders' victory, and it paints them out as being a formidable army. And over the wide fields, the keen-eyed riders hunted down the few orcs that had escaped and still had strength to fly. Then, when they had laid their fallen comrades in a mound and had sung their praises, the riders made a great fire and scattered the ashes of their enemies. So ended the raid, and no news of it ever came back either to Mordor or Isengard, but the smoke of the burning rose high to heaven and was seen by many watchful eyes. Anyway, the next day we see the red sky and rejoin Aragorn and the gang. Just like the book, the group hide and the riders don't notice them.
Riders of Rohan! What news from the mark?
Jackson modelled the movement of the group on a flock of birds, and we see how their horses move like a swarm. Their horses were of great stature, strong and clean-limbed. Their grey coats glistened. Their long tails flowed in the wind. Their manes were braided on their proud necks. The men that rode them matched them well, tall and long-limbed. Their hair, flaxen pale, flowered under their light helms, and streamed in long braids behind them. In their hands were tall spears of ash. Painted shields were slung at their backs. Long swords were at their belts. Their burnished shirts of mail hung down upon their knees. Now these are based on Scandinavian riders, and Tolkien also pointed out they have horsehair helmets. However, getting men to fill these roles was a little difficult, so instead they put facial hair on women and had them being riders too. Now Éomer is described as being very inquisitive, and the group even discuss Boromir. Éomer warns them of the White Wizard, and he says he's an old man that walks with a hooded cloak.
He walks here and there, they say. There's an old man, hooded and cloaked.
This kind of lays the groundwork for the appearance of Gandalf, though there's way more paranoia in the book. Aragorn and the gang actually end up setting up a campfire, which is when they're approached by a strange figure from the dark. "Well, father, what can we do for you?" said Aragorn, leaping to his feet. "Come and be warm if you're cold." He strode forward, but the old man was gone. There was no trace of him to be found near at hand, and they did not dare wander far. The moon had set, and the night was very dark. Now the group then look around for their horses and realize they've all disappeared. It's really chilling when you're reading it, and we still don't ever get it cleared up exactly who it was. It was an evil phantom of Sarumon that we saw last night. I am sure of it. However, Legolas said that the horses didn't sound worried, and it was more like when they meet an old friend. Gandalf does mention later on it wasn't him, which I know a lot of people miss in the book. There have been people who've said he's just confused, because let's be honest, he's been through a whole age of time and space and theory time. We had a big theory time of everything. However, I think it just helps to lay the groundwork for why that meeting later on is so tense. As we've seen, they've already had a run-in with Sarumon. The book then gives us the line that we get in the movie.
Give me your name, Horsemaster, and I shall give you mine.
It's very much an interrogation in which Éomer tries to see if they're loyal to Saruman. However, in the work, Aragorn pulls out his sword and explains exactly who he is. He seemed to have grown in stature, while Éomer had shrunk, and in his living face they caught a brief vision of the power and majesty of the Kings of Stone. For a moment, it seemed to the eyes of Legolas that a white flame flickered upon the brows of Aragorn like a shining crown. Now this perfectly reflects the passage with Frodo before, and it shows how these two characters have grown with their burden. Describing the halflings as children to their eyes, this is a line we get in the film.
Only children to your eyes.
Now it's in this, they actually set the groundwork for the kingdom's dislike of Gandalf. They talk about at one point how his name was a password that actually helped to gain the king's favour. However, he ended up taking Shadowfax and says that since his return, he's let no man touch him. In the end though, both in the movie and book, they do end on good terms. Éomer in the book actually tries to recruit them as he knows they'd be solid warriors. In the movies, he gives them the horses of the slain to make up for them potentially killing the hobbits. These slain members can be spotted at the edge of the forest when Aragorn and co are looking at the bodies. In the background, you can catch helmets marking their graves, showing that the riders buried their friends. One little goof you can also catch happens when Éomer mounts his horse and you'll see his sword fall out its sheath. Happens very quick, but yeah, if you look closely, you'll see it drop out. Embarrassing, mate. You bloody should be embarrassed of yourself. And the gang then ride out to the burnt bodies, and we get a bit of trivia that no one's ever touched on before. Ever. This happens when Aragorn kicks the helmet. Did you know, yeah? Did you know, right? When Viggo Mortensen kicked this helmet, yeah? He actually broke his toes, yeah? Did you know that? So when he was screaming like that, it was the actor actually screaming in pain over doing it. Jackson kept it in the movie, and make sure you hit the thumbs up, yeah? If you've learned that brand new, never before said trivia. Now, but I did go into behind the scenes stuff, and Jackson said he was impressed Mortensen kept acting through the movie. Mortensen didn't bring it up until much later as well. He said the stunt crew were injured much worse than he was, and so he just pushed through. Guy didn't want to seem like a fanny. In the work though, they end up lighting a fire near the forest and hope that it draws the hobbits out in the night. The trees don't like it though, and seeing that fire, they then start reacting and moaning. Legolas then says, I have heard nothing of this in my own land, save only songs that tell how the Ondirim that men call Ents dwelt there long ago, but Fangorn is old even as the elves would reckon it. And that takes us into Merry and Pippin meeting Treebeard. Chapter 4 is titled Treebeard, and we really see the forest through their eyes. Described as being unlike Mirkwood, it's dim and said to be frightfully tree-ish. The pair say they can't imagine animals living there and that there's nothing to eat for hundreds of miles. They found that they were looking at a most extraordinary face. It belonged to a large, man-like, almost troll-like figure, at least 14 foot high, very sturdy, with a tall head and hardly any neck. Whether it was clad in stuff like green and grey bark or whether that was its hide was difficult to say. At any rate, the arms, at a short distance from the trunk, were not wrinkled but covered with brown smooth skin. The large feet had 7 toes each. The lower part of the face was covered with a sweeping grey beard, bushy, almost twiggy at the roots, thin and mossy at the ends. But at the moment, the hobbits noted little but the eyes. Voiced by John Rhys Davies, he brings a lot to the role. Davies has that booming voice, and I think it's brilliant they used him for this in Gimli. Recording his vocals through a wooden microphone, it's something Jackson was inspired for by the book. Described as having a deep voice like a woodwind instrument, you can definitely feel this when the character talks. It's believed Tolkien actually based this on his friend C.S. Lewis, who was of course the author of the Narnia books. And the movie alters things a lot, as in the work the meeting's pretty straightforward. Treebeard calls the Ents, they have their council, and then decide to go to war. That's it. Boom. Straight to the point. I could learn something about that myself. Treebeard in the book lives a really sheltered life and even asks what's happening in the world. He says that he's never heard of hobbits and that he'd know because the elves made all the words. Men have of course taken over most of the land, and yeah, the guy's basically still using MySpace. There's even a passage in which he talks about how the elves helped the Ents to evolve, and it would make sense he thought they created all the words. Still, I take more kindly to elves than to others. It was the elves that cured us of dumbness long ago, and that was a great gift that cannot be forgotten, though our ways have parted since. Now the Ents in general are very confined to their lives and have never branched out beyond that. Pun intended there. This is touched upon in the text and how they've sort of changed their surroundings. Sheep get like shepherds and shepherds like sheep. As we talked about, Two Towers had to be compiled from a lot of stuff, and Jackson actually looked at some of the characters he'd omitted. There are parts of Treebeard's dialogue that come from Tom Bombadil, with Jackson reworking some of the lines.
Oh, Tom Bombadil, oh, by water, wood and hill, By the reed and willow, by fire, sun and moon.
Oh, shut up, man, Tom, will you? Just shut the fuck up. Treebeard also drops them before the White Wizard, and we cut before we learn who this is. It's called tension. Anyway, in the work, he takes them to an Ent house, and the court assembles around a giant stone table. Merry and Pippin do a previously on, and basically recap the story so far. Lying on pillows of grass, the forest is then said to glow as the Ents begin to talk. We also get Treebeard going to sleep at one point, which involves him standing outside. Guy goes stiff and upright like a tree and just stands there in the rain. Now when they're talking, Treebeard asks if there's any Entwives near the Shire. He goes into how they lost them and thus haven't made any more Entlings. Those are basically Ent children, and he explains the differences between the two, with the Ents loving the great trees and the mountain peaks. The Entwives gave their minds to lesser trees and the meads beyond the forest. Thus they left and haven't been seen since. It's in this that we learn of the other Ents, including one called Finglas. There's also one named Bregalad who becomes a friend to Merry and Pippin, and he ends up taking care of them. Now in the movie, initially the Ents are against the war, and they say they're not on anybody's side. This is something they bring from the book, with Tolkien taking nods from the war. He'd seen how those apathetical to the Nazis had let the evil expand unchecked. A lot of countries ended up getting involved, but there were still some that remained out the conflict. Switzerland, for example, refused to get involved in the war, and I feel like this inspired some of the dialogue with the Riders of Rohan. In the book, when questioning Aragorn, they say, "We do not serve the power of the Black Land far away, but neither are we yet at open war with him, and if you're fleeing from him, then you'd best leave this land. There is trouble now on all borders, and we are threatened, but we desire only to be free, and to live as we have lived, keeping our own and serving no foreign lord, good or evil." Jackson somewhat changes his dynamic and has them well aware that Sarumon's infected Rohan. On the flip side of this, like I mentioned earlier, the Ents decide to go to war off their own back. For the movie, Merry has to manipulate them and make them see firsthand they have to get involved. I feel like that might make them potentially a play off America and how they remain relatively neutral early on, at least. It was only after the attack on Pearl Harbor they decided to go all in, and that's kind of what the Ents are doing. The Ents are overpowered when compared to everyone else, and it could reflect the superpower of the American army. The forest being ripped down is what sends them over, whereas here they rightly know the evil must be stamped out. "For these Isengarders are more like wicked men. It is a mark of evil things that came in the great darkness that they cannot abide the sun, but Saruman's orcs can endure it, even if they hate it. I wonder what he has done. Are they men he has ruined, or has he blended the races of orcs and men? That would be a black evil." The Ents are obviously one with nature, so they hate the idea of corruption, and have seen mirrors of themselves, much like how the Uruk-hai are mirrors of men. Trolls are said to be mockeries of the Ents, much like how the orcs are mockeries to the elves. The Ents are very much a representation of trees and nature, whereas the trolls are sort of a representation of rocks and being stupid. Tolkien was of course a conservationist though, with the trilogy having an anti-industrial message. We get long passages here where he describes nature and all the Ents arriving. In the end, the council goes on for 3 days, whereas in the movie they kind of wrap it up quite quickly. Now from here we cut across to Gollum leading Frodo and Sam through the Dead Marshes. Taking place in chapter 13, this is titled The Passage of the Marshes.
Orcs don't use it. Orcs don't know it. They go round for miles and miles.
One term Gollum uses that has always stuck with me is that he calls the sun Yellowface. He treats it like an ominous presence and hides from it because he says it shows you up. Now we really see Gollum become a companion, which is reflected in the work. Gollum moved quickly, with his head and neck thrust forward, often using his hands as well as his feet. Frodo and Sam were hard put to keep up with him, but he seemed no longer to have any thought of escaping, and if they fell behind, he would turn and wait for them. The movie perfectly captures him singing in croaks, and also his song about catching a fish. The extended edition also gives us that moment where Gollum's nearly sick from eating lembas bread. Frodo broke off a portion of a wafer and handed it to him on its leaf wrapping. Gollum sniffed at the leaf and his face changed. A spasm of disgust came over it, and a hint of his old malice. Now this is a site that we visited before, and this is where the prologue of Fellowship took place. There we witnessed the Battle of Dagorlad, which is why there's all these dead elves here. Gollum explains in the book how they fought upon the land, with the battle going all the way to the Black Gate. Since then, the marshes expanded and ended up swallowing the graves. They talk about how there's no green there and describe it as a land diseased beyond healing. In the pools, when the candles were lit, they lie in the pools, pale faces, deep, deep under the water. I saw them, grim faces and evil, and noble faces and sad. Many faces proud and fair, and weeds in their silver hair, but all foul, all rotting, all dead. Now in our fellowship breakdown, we talked about the Barrow-wights and how eerie it was. Ghostly figures were seen in the mist, and it was very much the same vibe. I feel like Jackson just combined the two scenes, as it might have been repetitive to include them both. In the book, Frodo doesn't fall into the water, whereas he gets trapped in a barrow and attacked by the Barrow-wights. The line Gollum says,
"Cold be heart and hand and bone, and cold be travellers far from home."
That actually comes from the Barrow-wight chapter in the book. So you can see how it's brought across, but I love the way they handle it here, with it highlighting the horrors of war. Tolkien was said to have seen bodies like this on the battlefield during World War I. No Man's Land was often a muddy mess where puddles and water would collect. It saw Tolkien came across bodies like this, and it made him realise how terrifying it was. Beyond just bombs and explosions, you have these lively ghostless figures that surround you. It adds to the horror, and we see that when Frodo goes in head first. Here we see our first sights of ghosts, which are later reflected in Return of the King. They're ripped right out of a horror movie, and the green spectres nearly pull him in. Gollum ends up saving his life though, which highlights he actually cares. And the work tells us that even though he's helping them, they still don't trust him. The pair agree to take shifts to spy on him, with Sam taking the first. Guy falls asleep though, great job, and he wakes up having lost 9 hours. Gollum's nowhere to be seen, but he ends up coming back, his mouth covered in dead bugs. Nice. In the film though, we see Frodo lying awake with him caressing the ring. Gollum is doing the same thing, highlighting the two being similar to each other. Ultimately, Frodo knows deep down that this pathetic creature is what he could become. It works so well as a metaphor for addiction and what it can lead to. Interestingly, I also noticed that Sam calls Frodo Master as well, which is a term Gollum uses throughout. So to me, this kind of paints out the pair as being a devil and angel on Frodo's shoulders. One's pulling him towards home and things like the Shire, whereas the other's leading him to a lonely life with the ring. Finally though, Frodo treats him like a person, and he uses his true name Smeagol. We see something stirring in the creature, and his eyes widen to highlight he's coming out. Now the original plan here was to have his backstory fade in, and then we'd see how he got the ring. However, this scene was shifted to the opening of Fellowship, though I do think it would have worked here really well. Either way, this scene humanizes Gollum, and it slowly pulls him back from the dock. It's a good thing too, because the work tells us that their fates are wholly in his hands. We get vast passages explaining the journey through the land and how it's a weary and tiresome trek. There's not a bird in sight, but something's off.
Hasn't been sight nor sound of a bird for 2 days.
It also says every so often Gollum will pause, stand at full height, and then crane his neck. At one point he hears a great shriek and something appears on the horizon. A small cloud flying from the accursed hills, a black shadow loosed from Mordor, a vast shape winged and ominous. It scudded across the moon, and with a deadly cry went away westward, outrunning the wind in its fell speed. It's definitely playing off the bird spies in the Fellowship, but in the end, we see its wraiths on wings.
They fly now! They fly now!
Now the wraith here comes on the back of a fell beast. Though some people refer to this as a dragon, Tolkien actually had the creatures as being like pterodactyls. They can't breathe fire, but what they do is offer protection from the skies. This is why the eagles can't just fly them to Mordor, because there's a chance that this could take them down. I did wonder if this was playing off the Battle of Britain, with the eagles being metaphors for Spitfires. Let me know below if you agree or not, if you think there's more metaphors, but from here on they're completely filled with fear. The remainder of that journey was a shadow of growing fear in which memory could find nothing to rest upon. Now at this point we could have crossed to Aragorn and co. This takes us into chapter 5, which is titled The White Rider. I wasn't able to verify this, but apparently that was one of the titles they floated about when they were thinking of reworking the Two Towers. There is a line in the book about how he's returned as the White Rider in order to combat the Black Ones. Those are of course the alias of the Nazgul, so he's been brought back to fight against them. The chapter begins with a group waking up at the fire looking for the signs of the old man's footprints. Finding a lembas bread leaf in the daylight, it's here they put together the pieces of Pippin's escape. Coming across a knife, they go into Batman detective mode and follow their tracks into the forest. However, they witness someone stalking them. It is he, cannot you see him passing from tree to tree? Initially they didn't spot him because he was wearing dirty grey rags which blended into the trees. Aragorn warns, do not let him speak, which is a line that comes directly from the work. The whole scene is really accurate to the text, with them playing out the dialogue line for line. This includes Gandalf saying they met someone they did not expect, and the fearful responses the group have. We see how powerful he is as he's able to destroy their weapons with ease. Jackson also really messes with your head as he has both the voice of Liam McKellen.
You are tracking the footsteps of two young hobbits. They passed this way.
Jackson also plays flashes of Lee's eyes through CGI, with the figure's face morphing throughout. The group's frozen in place, with the reveal being a big moment for the characters. There he stood, grown suddenly tall, towering above them. His hood and his grey rags were flung away. His white garment shone. He lifted up his staff, and Gimli's axe leaped from his grasp and fell ringing on the ground. The sword of Aragorn, stiff in his motionless hand, blazed with a sudden fire. Legolas gave a great shout and shot an arrow high into the air. It vanished in a flash of flame. "Mithrandir!" he cried. "Mithrandir!" Now that's an alias of Gandalf, with us getting the line,
That was my name.
Obviously they changed it in the movie, so they're not just introducing a nickname we haven't heard before. It's in this so that he then tells us what's going on with the ring and how the eagles filled him in. Could say a big birdie told him, eh? Now in the work, they actually explain a lot more of their plan, which kind of gets skirted around in the movies. I do think this stuff probably should have been included because it's a big part that explains what it is that's going on. Gandalf says that Sarumon's aware of the Fellowship and knows that a hobbit has the ring. He's under the impression it's with Merry and Pippin, which explains to him why Aragorn and the gang ran after them. He thinks that if they were heading to Mordor, they would have allowed them to get taken. The gang would have then continued to Mordor and cut their losses with the two hobbits. He didn't think that Aragorn would have put so much importance in saving two little halflings. So he thinks that they're travelling to Minas Tirith, which Gandalf's happy to play into. This is why in Return of the King, he makes it his mission to take Pippin there. That we should seek to destroy the ring itself has not yet entered his darkest dream. He believes they're going to try and use the ring as a weapon, which Sauron knows will fail. Now they want to keep up the facade, as it means Sauron will send his forces to Gondor. This means that Mordor will be less guarded, so the distraction's extremely important. This is why Gandalf tells them to go to Theoden, as they need to recruit an army for the battle that's coming. At the hour mark on the extended edition, we do get a scene where they lay this all out. This is missing from the theatrical, and I always remembered it from the Two Towers game. It actually was the scene that took place in the Return of the King section, so I feel like they shifted it for the extended edition. Aragorn says,
"You still speak in riddles,"
which is a line that comes directly from the work. Here Gandalf's describing how Merry and Pippin are like the stones that start off an avalanche, and that they're forces that will cause the dam to break. It's here in the book that Gandalf also tells of Moria, and we discover more of the battle. The work explains how Gandalf was burned and plunged into the deep waters of the abyss. Battling from there, they then went up to Celebdil, which is the tower at the top of the mountain. In death, he says he was naked before being sent back, and it's believed this was by Eru Ilúvatar, which I can't pronounce, but he's basically the god in the Lord of the Rings universe. There I lay staring up while the stars wheeled overhead, and each day was as long as the life age of the earth. Faint to my ears came the gathered rumour of all lands, the springing and the dying, the song and the weeping, and the slow everlasting groan of overburdened stone. And so at last, Gwaihir the Wind Lord found me again, and he took me up and bore me away. Gandalf was then actually taken to Lothlorien, where the elves nursed him back to health. Jackson considered including this scene, but I think it's better they just have him return healed. Finally though, the group decide to leave the forest, and Gandalf whistles to Shadowfax. In the book, they explain he's the Lord of Horses, and we see this respect in the characters around him. As he rides in, Shadowfax bows his head, and Legolas and Gimli bow their heads in return. I love how, as McKellen approaches him, he does this little wink as well, and it's just subtle things that highlight their friendship. Now there was the rumour going around that you could see Gandalf wearing white Converses during this scene. This has since been debunked, with the creative team saying it's just the way his boots were covered by his trousers. What he does though is wear Pippin's leaf clasp to keep his cloak in place. Now in the source material, we learn that two of the horses are called Hasafel and Arod. They changed things slightly for the movie, as in the book they're the ones that Shadowfax brings with him, whereas in the movie, they're the ones that Éomer gifts. I actually prefer that though, because it keeps the focus on Shadowfax, but we do learn in the work they are loyal to the Horse Lord. It says they came almost like a wedding orders, and Shadowfax commands them to ride. From here, they gallop across the land with Shadowfax guiding the way. The horse basically has a built-in sat-nav that takes them the shortest route through the quickest streams and passages. It's here where the chapter ends ominously, and I feel like it inspired the Red Sky bit. Looking out over the great plain, far away the riders saw it for a moment like a red fire sinking into the grass. Low upon the edge of sight shoulders of the mountains glinted red upon either side. A smoke seemed to rise up and darken the sun's disk to the hue of blood, as if it had kindled the grass as it passed down under the rim of the earth. There lies the gap of Rohan, said Gandalf. It is now almost due west of us. That way lies Isengard. I see great smoke, said Legolas. What may that be? Battle and war, said Gandalf. Ride on! Now from here we jump to Frodo to play out chapter 14, titled The Black Gate is Closed. Whoa, spoiler alert there, mate. Here we find them looking out to Cirith Gorgon, which is nicknamed the Teeth of Mordor. Based on the work of John Howe and Alan Lee, it's a vast expansive gate of death. Described as the Haunted Pass, it's the main entrance to the land of the enemy. In days long past, they were built by the men of Gondor in their pride and power, after the overthrow of Sauron and his flight, lest he should seek to return to his old realm. But the strength of Gondor failed, and men slept, and for long years the tower stood empty. Then Sauron returned. Seizing them, they've now been filled with countless eyes and a garrison with ceaseless vigilance. We then get the armies marching, though we don't get the cloak scene in the book. Now, these are Easterlings who we meet at this point in the movie. Sam asks if they've got an Oliphant, and in the book he busts out a poem. Grey as a mouse, big as a house, nose like a snake, I make the earth shake. Goes on, yeah, but I'll not do your head in. In the book, they end up waiting for hours, but realise there's absolutely no gap. Gollum says that it's pointless, and they ask why he brought them there. He says because the master told him to, and it cements they should really start to listen to him. In the end, Frodo says he'll go alone, as he doesn't want to put the two in danger. However, just like the movie, Gollum begs him not to go and says it will lead to him getting the precious. Gollum actually never calls Sauron Sauron in the Wurg, and instead always refers to him as him. I love how he also desperately begs him to stay and paws at his cloak like a cat. He's trying to do whatever he can, and yeah, it's just a cute little thing. It's in this that Gollum also brings up how there's another way. He ends up muttering something in the book which Sam can't hear. In hindsight, we know this is Shelob, which plays into a scene that we get in the story. The night before, Sam lay awake and could hear Smeagol talking to himself. Fascinated with the debate, he notices that Gollum constantly says she. Something they also notice in the sky is the black shadows that keep flying by. So in the end, they decide to go around. Now in the extended edition, we get a play off the scene from Fellowship. This is Merry and Pippin getting trapped by a tree, which is based off the bit with Old Man Willow. There it was Tom Bombadil who pulled them out, whereas here they gave that scene to Treebeard. In it though, they also drink a bit of water, which helps them to grow. It's an okay scene if you're a fan of the work, but I can totally see why this was cut down. Now after this, we see Gandalf and co arriving at Edoras. The chapter in the works titled The King of the Golden Hall, and we begin with them arriving at the location. Edoras is breathtaking, and it was created in New Zealand on Mount Sunday. The thatched huts and halls took over 6 months to build, but they didn't waste the space. The interiors doubled as offices and mess halls where the cast and crew could pick up their lunch. As we go through the kingdom, we see how everywhere has symbols of horses, with them even being on the archways on the roof. Cutting across to Eowyn and Grima, we see as he tries to seduce her. In the book, the line about the words being seductive here is actually said by Gandalf, but they changed it up to give Durif a bit more character. Off this, I also wonder if Grima had a hand in killing Theodred.
Oh, he must have died sometime in the night.
The lack of real grief here there definitely made it feel like he may have poisoned him or smothered him in his sleep. That's something I completely read into it, but it leaves Eowyn on her own. Stroking her face while he tells her there's no one left, her saviors come in the form of the riders. Rushing outside, we see as the flag flies from the Golden Hall and lands beside Aragorn. I love the visual of this, and this is symbolically like a cry for help. They are extending a message from their kingdom to the king who will come in and save them. However, this was actually a bit of literal movie magic. Jackson said when they filmed the bit with Eowyn, the flag just blew away in the wind. However, they decided to use it as a way to let us follow it to Aragorn. Maybe Uruk-hai exists. Building off the back of the Scandinavian riders, we have these large Viking-like halls. Not that I've studied the period, but I remember something similar being used in Beowulf and also the Northmen. So you can see where Jackson got his influence, and this chapter helps to fill the readers in. Early on, they describe the history of Rohan, and we see just how secretive they are. Arriving at the gates, the gods speak a funny language, and this is done so that only those who know can enter. Luckily they do, but it's a rule that's been brought in which cements Theoden's distrust. They tell the gods they're returning the horses, which builds off the bit with the riders before. They then refuse them, but we get a great quote from Gandalf. "We are all friends here, or should be. for the laughter of Mordor will be our only reward if we quarrel. In the end, the gods let them in because they see Aragorn's sword and realize who he is. He is the king who was promised, not you, Jon Snow. Now in the movie, we see how there's a big thing about not taking Gandalf's staff.
You would not part an old man from his walking stick.
The gods actually intentionally leave him with it in the book though. They realize he's a powerful wizard and they see him as someone to save their king. We see this when they break loose and attack and we have a god holding another god back. Gandalf also feigns being old as he loops Legolas's arm like he can't walk. Now despite their appearance, the wizards were actually sprite and agile, with them using this to their advantage. The Grey Cloak also makes Gandalf seem like he's still a grey wizard. Entering, we get this incredible description. In the middle of the dais was a great gilded chair. Upon it sat a man so bent with age that he seemed almost a dwarf, but his white hair was long and thick and fell in great braids from beneath a thin golden circlet set upon his brow. In the centre, upon his forehead shone a single white diamond. His beard was laid like snow upon his knees, but his eyes still burned with a bright light, glinting as he gazed at the strangers. However, Grima's in his ear, and the king wonders why he should welcome them. Wormtongue says Gandalf brings ill news, and ill news makes for an ill guest.
Why should I welcome you, Gandalf Stormcrow?
Love how Grima's just like, just question my lord. Like, he's just said something really clever and is basically just his hype man. Now this name Gandalf Stormcrow has a special meaning to it. To the men of Edoras, he only appears before a war and always comes asking for help. So he's the crow that comes before the storm, hence that name, which is a nice touch. Now in the book and film, I love how he reveals he's Gandalf the White. The work has him singing a song of Lorien and then springing forth. Thus Gandalf softly sang, and suddenly he changed. Casting his tattered cloak aside, he stood up and leaned no longer on his staff, and he spoke in a clear, cold voice. We then get a brilliant moment where we see the possession of Sarumon almost like a demon. It reminds me a lot of The Exorcist, and I love how Saruman's voice comes out of him.
If I go, Theoden dies.
This is a technique that they often use in horror to make it so the heroes can't really intervene. Alien is a great example where the facehugger could kill its host if they try and set it free. Haven't seen Exorcist for a while, but I'm sure the demon there also says they'll kill Reagan if they try and remove it. Go watch my Exorcist breakdown from last year where I could remember it. Anyway, the transformation's incredible in both the book and film. From the king's hand, the black staff fell clattering on the stones. He drew himself up slowly as a man that is stiff from long bending over some dull toil. Now tall and straight he stood, and his eyes were blue as he looked into the opening sky. I love how the eyes change here as well, and they go from misted over and cataracts to now being clear. It highlights his eyes are once more open and he can see things for how they really are.
Dark have been my dreams of late.
Theoden has very much been stuck in a dream, but now he's awake and ready to fight. We then get this line from the book.
Your fingers would remember their old strength better if they grasped your sword.
Gandalf tells Theoden he should pick up his sword to remember his strength, and this symbolically shows what Gandalf needs him for. In order to provide a distraction, they need Rohan to be warriors. So he's making the king remember what it means to fight so he can join him in the battle.
The young perish and the old linger.
In the book, he's talking about Faramir, whereas here it's about his son. The guy clearly wants vengeance, and he orders Wormtongue brought before him.
Your leechcraft would have had me crawling on all fours like a beast.
Éomer then says, "Down on your belly. How long is it since Sarumon bought you? What was the promised price? When all the men were dead, you were to pick your share of treasures and take the woman you desire. Too long have you watched her under your eyelids and haunted her steps," which was reworked to appear earlier in the movie when Éomer was banished. Now in both the book and film, Theoden banishes Grima. However, with this, Theoden plays coy initially and pretends to not be aware of his treachery. He tests Wormtongue and asks him to join the war if he's so loyal to Rohan. Wormtongue proposes being left as steward while they head to Helm's Deep. Now just like the Ents, the book doesn't really have the tension where Theoden doesn't want to ride to war. He says that's the best place to go, whereas here he goes back and forth with it. Gandalf also convinces Theoden to spare Wormtongue's life. He too has his part to play as he ends up being the one who betrays Sarumon. Now I always read that as being akin to the speech with Frodo about Gollum. They're on the side of life and believing that good can prevail, and this is even in the hearts of bad guys. In the movie, it's Aragorn who steps in, but Grima spits at his hand. Now in the next scene with him, he describes Aragorn Aragorn's ring in great detail. Sarumon even looks this up in the book. Putting 2 and 2 together, we know that Grima was able to do this because Aragorn extended his hand here. Slowly, Wormtongue rose. He looked at them with half-closed eyes. Last of all, he scanned Theoden's face and opened his mouth as if to speak. Then suddenly, he drew himself up. His hands worked. His eyes glittered. Such malice was in them that men stepped back from him. He bared his teeth, and then with a hissing breath he spat before the king's feet, and darting to one side he fled down the stairs. They use him as a way to send a message to Saruman that Edoras won't be manipulated. You see, Rohan was picked so that dark forces could pass through easily. This meant the orcs would have safe passage and the Easterlings wouldn't have to go the long way. This is also why the orcs were passing through at the start. Theoden forbid Éomer from going, and had he listened, they would have taken the hobbits to Isengard. To Isengard! To Isengard!
The hobbits, the hobbits, the hobbits, the hobbits, to Isengard! To Isengard!
Seeing the Middle-earth play on a medieval funeral, we then get Éowyn singing a lament. I love the headdress that they have here, and you really get the sorrow in the performance. Miranda Otto does a fantastic job in the movie, especially since this is pretty much a nothing character in the work. Liv Tyler actually made a joke with her when they were doing the Helm's Deep scenes that it was nice to speak to another woman. As we know, Liv's part got cut though, but I think Éowyn has one of the best arcs. Come Return of the King, she'll be a powerful warrior, and obviously we'll be discussing that very soon. This funeral scene was also inspired by Beowulf, with Philippa Boyens taking language from the poem and using it as lyrics in the song. We also have the white flowers, which we learn grow only on the graves. I did wonder if this was a nod to the White Tree, which we see at Minas Tirith. This has a big history in the book, with it all tying back to Numenor. Its leaves falling symbolise the end of the kingdom, and these blooming here could signify the same thing. That's me reaching, yeah, and if you have any other symbolism, then let me know below. How about we do know that Edoras could come to an end soon, as all the heirs are dying off. Instead, we just have the older figures like Theoden, who's witnessing the horrors of war. In conflicts, the soldiers are normally young men, with them being put on the front lines. So it's the old that are cursed to live on, which Theoden represents. I love how they add this layer to the movie, as it's clear he doesn't want more war. He's also very paranoid about the council around him due to Grima slapping the old man Felter on him. We see this demonstrated when Gandalf sits beside him and he tries to advise him on what course to take. You can see Theoden's eyes looking at his hands on the throne and being very suspicious. This is the same thing Grima did, and he's just seen how easily he can be misled.
I know what it is you want of me, but I will not bring further death to my people.
So instead of going to all-out war, he decides to move his people to Helm's Deep. This is said to be impenetrable, and the guy played the captain in Titanic, which was said to be unsinkable. Now, as many of you know, I live in the north of England, and I did wonder if the Deep was based on Hadrian's Wall. In case you don't know, that was built by the Romans, and it basically covered the entire breadth of the country. It was built to stop the Scots coming into Britannia. Impenetrable as well, I did wonder if these kind of fortitudes were thought up because of Tolkien's love of history. In the work, Theoden gives Shadowfaxus a gift, and the group all receive armor upgrades. Behold the White Rider and the King, is what they say, and yet it highlights the characters going to the next level. We end the chapter with Éowyn watching them ride out, with Shadowfax having no saddle or stirrups. It says horse and rider naturally take to each other, and that's something they bring into the movie. We then have Gandalf say,
"Look to my coming, at first light on the 5th day."
And he arrives right on time. I love this little callback to Fellowship, with it all paying off Gandalf's first appearance. There he explains to Frodo that a wizard's never early nor late, and that he arrives precisely when he means to, and yet shows up exactly when he said. Now that then takes us to the chapter Helm's Deep. This is where the film massively segues from the work and does its own thing completely. So no book passages. For now, don't make me threaten you with a bad time. No, I'm kidding, we'll be doing it in 5 minutes time.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Anyway, we see Aragorn talking to the horse Brago that he decides to let go. This comes full circle later on, as this is the horse that rescues Aragorn from the river. Viggo was so impressed by this animal that he actually ended up buying it. Then during the reshoots in 2002, he rode back with it to help complete the filming. In order to get it to go close up to his face later on, he ended up sleeping in its barn. This got the horse to trust him, and clearly they built a bond. James Bond. It's also in this that Jackson removed the character Erkenbrand. This was one of Theoden's loyalist lords in the novel. In the book, Aemma went with the group to Helm's Deep and he fought alongside the king. When Gandalf arrived, it was alongside Erkenbrand who led the charge of the Rohirrim. Instead, they just cut him and gave his part to Aemma, which was probably easier for the story, not juggling as many characters. Now we can see a lot of sorrow as they clear out of Edoras. Gamling is clearly not at the retreat and we have Eowyn showing she's capable with a sword. It allows her and Aragorn to get to know each other and helps flesh out where the humans are at in general. They're on the back foot, scattered by evil and apathetic to the dark forces surrounding them. Now from here we could have crossed to the Hobbits for chapter 15. Titled Herbs and Stewed Rabbit, it's in this chapter they introduce Faramir. However, the build up to it is mainly their traversal. For the few hours of daylight that were left, they rested, shifting into the shade as the sun moved, until the last shadow of the western rim of the dell grew long, and darkness filled all the hollow. They ate little and drank sparingly. Gollum ate nothing, but he accepted water gladly. It then talks about how he loves water, as that's where he can drink and also get his food from. Rivers are obviously teeming with fishes, which we get brought across brilliantly. We see Gollum chasing after a fish with him moving his belly across the rocks. This was arguably one of the most complex visual shots in the movie, as they had to have him interacting with the water. Circus performed it in the suit, and they then had to completely replace him. It makes for a brilliant scene though, and it shows how pathetic he is.
There's not left in him but lies and deceit.
Frodo says Sam's got no idea what burden he carries and that he has to help him because
I have to believe he can come back.
Now when he's saying this, I actually think he's also talking about himself.
It's my task. Mine. My own.
This could be Frodo's eventual fate. Gollum ends up missing the fish, but it comes full circle later on. At the Forbidden Pool, he finally catches one, and it's in this that he turns back to being bad. This turn to the good side, though, is what we see in the next scene. Easily the most memorable performance in the trilogy, we see this literal battle between good and bad. That's what I love about this moment, because it reminds you of the main theme of the film. Will good conquer evil? Can we cast out the shadow? And it's brilliant having this all in one character. The direction is also perfect as well, with it being shot like how you'd shoot dialogue with two characters. We have the expert editing, a groundbreaking performance from a CGI character, and just a really memorable performance by Circus. All in all, it's a highlight in the film that leads to Smeagol winning out. I love the way Gollum says they survived because of him, and yeah, I remember Joel saying something similar in The Last of Us. He says that to Tommy, and it always kind of reminded me of this. Dancing merrily after being freed, we then get the next part of the chapter and tie into the title. On the ground beside him lay two small rabbits, which he was beginning to eye greedily. This then goes into a section explaining their cooking and what Sam brought with him. All hobbits, of course, can cook, so they begin to learn the art before their letters, which many never reach. But Sam was a good cook, even by hobbit reckoning, and he had done a good deal of the camp cooking on their travels, when there was a chance. He still hopefully carried some of his gear in his pack, a small tinderbox, two small shallow pans, the smaller fitting into the larger. Inside them, a wooden spoon, a short two-pronged fork and some skewers were stowed. And hidden at the bottom of the pack in a flat wooden box, a dwindling of treasure, some salt. They then have an argument with Gollum about stewing the conies, and Jackson takes some lines directly from the work.
Potatoes.
Keep nasty chips.
Now in the work, it's at this point that Faramir's company come looking for them. They actually saw the smoke from the fire and decided to investigate. 4 tall men stood there. 2 had spears in their hand with broad bright heads. 2 had great bows, almost of their own height, and great quivers of long green feathered arrows. Faramir then steps forth, and the hobbits see the likeness to Boromir instantly. At once, Frodo thought of Boromir, for these men were like him in stature and bearing, and in their manner of speech. Now, they reorder things in the film, as from this point on the pair sit and talk. Faramir then instructs some guards to watch them, who are named Mablung and Damrod. They're pretty friendly, and chat it out as they wait for their foes to arrive. I think in terms of showing how deadly they are though, Jackson actually does it better. You kind of have the same emotion as the hobbits, and I think the movie presents it a lot better. You have them hearing the whistle and then going to investigate. Coming across the army, you have the wonder of the Oliphants, because it's our first time seeing them as well. We then see as they're taken out by the Gondorians, and it shows us how deadly they are. It also explains why the hobbits couldn't just slip away, whereas in the book I was a bit like, just do a runner mate, get out of there. The guys basically sit around chatting for the chapter, and I think we needed to see how they were in action. Now in the work, Frodo is obviously hiding the ring, ring and doesn't want it falling into the hands of men. They also have the fact that Gollum escaped and they don't know whether he's an orc or a giant frog. However, Frodo quickly convinces Faramir he knew his brother by talking about his dream. That's something we talked about with Fellowship and is what made Boromir go to Rivendell. I had the word Broomir written in the script there and I was gonna delete it, but it actually works as a nickname. In the work though, the fight then breaks out and Sam sees a soldier dying feet away from him, just like the movie. His scarlet robes were tattered. His corselet of overlapping brazen plates was rent and hewn. His black plaits of hair braided with gold were drenched with blood. His brown hands still clutched the hilt of a broken sword. It was Sam's first view of a battle of men against men, and he did not like it much. He was glad that he could not see the dead face. He wondered what the man's name was, and where he came from, and if he was really evil of heart, or what lies or threats had led him on the long march from his home, and if he would not really rather have stayed there in peace. All in a flash of thought which was quickly driven from his mind. This is something they give to Faramir and it adds a lot of depth.
You wonder what his name is. If he was really evil at heart, if he'd not rather have stayed there in peace.
What it helps to do is give us a complex character who doesn't see glory in war. Standing over the body of a young soldier, he laments that he had to die here. It's a great comment on conflicts in general, and it plays into Tolkien's anti-war sentiments. Seeing death firsthand had greatly affected him, which I'm sure you could totally understand. This entire trilogy is something that I feel is a reaction to World War II, and that's something that was repeated in my research. Tolkien wanted to show how people from all races, sides and mentalities must come together to stop evil. All the allies, though their differences, unite as one to defeat the bad guys. That's something Tolkien represents in the work, as we have all these species working together. Anyway, from here we jump across to disc 2 of the extended edition and get the people moving across the land to Helm's Deep. Just look at that mountain view in the background, mate. Bloody beautiful. These days it'd probably just CGI all of that, but it makes even people walking across some grass look absolutely breathtaking. Gimli then talks about dwarf women and how you can't tell them apart from the men. It's the beards, as Aragorn says. Now they end up resting and we get a really funny character moment. Eowyn goes to offer Gimli some soup and he turns it down. Aragorn then has it and yeah, Gimli dodged a bullet because it's absolutely disgusting. We even get a top-down shot of it as he stirs it, and you can see there's hairs in it. In Fangorn, Gimli said dwarves have a great sense of smell, and this is probably how he knew it was terrible. In the extended edition, we also get a line about how Aragorn's 87 years old. He rode out with Eowyn's father to war, and Theoden was a child when he met him. He's lived with the elves since then, and descends from the Dunedain, who are said to have much longer lifespans. In our Fellowship breakdown, we discussed how the Rangers share these characteristics, and that the people at the Prancing Pony knew about them in the area. Now they ended up taking this out the theatrical because it just adds more questions. I always saw it as being like how Frodo's 50 in the book, but they don't ever mention the character's age. Makes you wonder if he's half elf or something, and without explaining everything, it's just easier to remove it. Now what I like here is that it also kind of sets up a love triangle with him, Eowyn and Arwen. First time watching it, I was wondering if he'd leave Arwen for her so that he could be with his own people. That hairy broth ain't working though, and he still pines for Arwen, which that also wasn't an intentional innuendo. Now we do see their relationship in full effect with the flashbacks to Rivendell. Originally this scene was scripted in English, but both Tyler and Mortensen had been learning Elvish, so she talked Jackson into letting them translate it for the film, and I think it really adds to the authenticity. It highlights how they're soulmates, but that this is going to come with a cost. Arwen will have the grief of losing him, and she'll mourn him until she eventually dies. Becoming human, she'll pass too, and that she's giving up her immortality. Watching this, I've always asked myself if I'd do it, and if it's better to live a short life with someone you love. This is great for Jackson to interject, and it's something that really just develops the characters. However, Aragorn knows that if Arwen stays, it's gonna be her death. He says to Elrond that she stays because she has hope, but he says he stays because of him. Thus he tries to slip off in the morning, but when she catches him, he tries to break up with her.
It was a dream, Arwen. Nothing.
He tries to give back the Elven star necklace, but she then makes him keep it. This is a nice little addition, as it's later used to show he might be dead after the fall. Now at this point the wargs attack, which again is a passage that comes from the Fellowship. Happening in a journey in the dark, they swear they can hear the wolf cries on the wind when climbing down the mountain. Without warning, a storm of howls broke out fierce and wild all about the camp. A great host of wargs had gathered silently, and was now attacking them from every side at once. That's how it feels here too, but the company's in great peril. We know these aren't warriors and they'll be easy pickings for the beasts. Originally they were going to strike at Edoras, and this is why Theoden would flee. I think it works better on the road though, and it feels almost biblical. Having to make their way through this reminded me a lot of Moses and the freed slaves, and how they were at danger on every side. Legolas then leaps to Gimli's horse in one slick move. Jackson initially tried to do this practically, but as you can imagine, not easy to do. Orlando Bloom had also just cracked a rib, so he wasn't able to just leap up and do it. So they decided to CGI this version, which they actually exaggerated the movements on. With Bloom, he was just going to do a simple jump, but this allows them to show how capable the elves are. It's a great action scene, and it helps to break up the downtime as we see the wargs versus horses. That's why I think they were better holding it off until this movie, as it just adds a different dynamic. It's also important for Theoden to see how the dark forces are conquering men. Not only has he lost his son, but in Aragorn going over, he's lost the true king of Gondor. So the future of men is seeming even more hopeless, and it adds more stakes dropping it here. Gimli and Legolas also start their counting game.
No one counts as mine!
Arriving at Helm's Deep, this was also designed by Alan Lee and John Howe. The scope and scale of the bigger chair was completely gigantic, with grown men being able to walk up and down it. It really adds to the realism of the location, and coupled with the full scale set, it just makes things feel like they're real. Which is great analysis there, Paul. Now due to Grima, we know the one weakness it has. At the base of the wall is a storm drain that provides a passage all the way up. Using explosives, Saruman's eventually able to bring it down. The book doesn't actually mention dynamite or gunpowder, and instead it's described as devilry from Orthanc. They also wonder if this will be used to seal the women and children in the caves. Anyway, at this point we see Saruman stepping out of the tower and looking over his legion. This reminded me a lot of the imagery of Triumph of the Will, with the army being lined out in rows. This was something that was utilised during the opening of Dune Part 2, and it's probably the most powerful real-life example we have showing evil en masse. Wormtongue then ends up crying, which Jurif could apparently do at will. Even though this army's obviously not here, it just sells the feeling of how vast that it is. I also feel like this is almost a moment of regret. He knows that there's enough here to wipe out mankind, and that all his friends and allies from Edoras will probably end up dead. I also wondered if it was playing on the famous quote by Alexander the Great. It was said he wept when he realized there were no worlds left to conquer. So it kind of feels like it plays off there, and alongside this we see Treebeard marching past Isengard as Merry spots the army. Knowing he has to do something, this moment's a key part of the plot. Accompanying this is Aragorn drifting down the river. There is a moment where we get a version of her kissing him, and you can do a cheeky little edit where it's actually the horse licking his face. Dream versus reality shit right there. It's in this that we also see Elrond at Rivendell telling Arwen it's time to sail into the west. This is to Valinor, which is famous for its two trees. These can be seen hanging up on the tapestry, with them later being destroyed by Melkor. It's in this that we then get a version of the future which is taken from the appendices. Here it extends far beyond Aragorn's passing, with her wandering the earth for an eternity alone. Now in the extended text we learn she actually died a year after Aragorn's death. That was at the young age of 2,901.
Just a kid.
So it wasn't like she grieved forever like what we get here, which is a nice way to look at it, I guess. I think that it highlights her mortality though, and she actually ended up having two daughters with Aragorn. Elrond here is just kind of a disapproving dad who doesn't want his daughter throwing her life away. In the end though, I think he realises how much he means to her. Arwen seems to go off into the west, with her crossing the bridge of Rivendell and then looking over her shoulder at him. As mentioned earlier though, she was gonna run off and then fight at Helm's Deep. That would be a big act of rebellion, whereas here it's just kind of implied. We also see as Elrond telepathically connects with Galadriel. Knowing that the enemy's power is growing, we now see the Eye fully formed in the Palantir. I love how Galadriel describes Saruman as a puppet, and it really sums up the character. To me, he's always kind of been like Mussolini, and just the guy who'd never really be on top. He thinks he's in the club though. Galadriel also talks about the ring, and we see the flipping shot that was used in the Fellowship. We also get a play on the prologue in the first film, with the same music being used to discuss the men.
Men who are so easily seduced by its power.
This entire section could work as its own prologue, and I wonder if it was a carryover from when it was just going to be two movies.
The time of the elves is over. Do we let them stand alone?
Now at this point we go to chapter 16, The Window on the West. This was actually a sort of fill-in on the entire journey, travelling from the hills to the Forbidden Pool. Faramir starts to doubt Frodo's story, and he's heard rumours of Isildur's bane. Frodo tells him of Aragorn and says that he should ask his brother all his questions. It's at this point that Faramir tells him he's dead, which is a moment we get in the film. The way Faramir realised though actually came to him in a vision in which he saw his body floating in a boat. This is what we see in the movie, with it transitioning into a dream. A broken sword was on his knee. I saw many wounds on him. It was Boromir, my brother, dead. I knew his gear, his sword, his beloved face. One thing only I missed, his horn. As we know, this was sliced at the battle at the end of Fellowship, and thus it shows his connection to his brother's spiritual. In the film, Jackson shoots this all without dialogue, and we get the readings solely from his face. David Wenham was cast due to his likeness to Sean Bean, but he brings so much more than just being a lookalike. Distrusting Frodo, and due to the fact Frodo doesn't know Boromir died, is something we see the character wrestle with. In the book, Faramir chalks this up as meaning that they weren't good friends, or they parted on bad terms. Knowing his brother, he also realizes they probably fought over something which was likely an object. What in truth this thing is, I cannot yet guess, but some heirloom of power and peril it must be. A fell weapon, perchance, devised by the Dark Lord. If it were a thing that gave advantage in battle, I can well believe that Boromir the proud and fearless, often rash, even anxious for victory of Minas Tirith, and his own glory therein, might desire such a thing and be allured by it. Now he also talks about his own goals in general. Faramir says he'd like to see the White Tree bloom again, and ponders whether this weapon could help them. He then tells his men to blindfold the pair, which is what we see them wearing as they travel in the film. Normally, you just blindfold someone's eyes, but here you can see they cover their whole face. This was actually done for practical reasons, as it covered up the doubles. In the extended edition, we then get a flashback scene in which Boromir defends Osgiliath. Guy cuts his speech short, so there's more time for drinking, and he has a lot of banter. According to IMDb trivia though, Bean actually had returned to England after Fellowship due to shooting all his scenes. However, he was requested to return for this flashback. They then cut it from the theatrical, and I'd be fuming because hey, it's like a 24-hour flight, that. Now this is also the introduction of Denethor, whereas he was saved for the third film in the theatrical versions. We really get just how much he favours Boromir as he berates Faramir for nearly losing the city. He says that Boromir held off the orcs single-handedly and doesn't want to give glory to anyone else, even his second son. Boromir stands up to his dad though and says Faramir is trying his best, but Denethor just can't see it. As it said, he didn't give him enough men, which is a mistake he repeats in Return of the King. I think he just doesn't care about his safety and is happy to send him to his death. That coming full circle in that movie is set up perfectly here, and I really feel like this scene is crucial. We see as Denethor tells Boromir the ring's been found, and he warns him that the ring can corrupt the hearts of men. Thus he says Boromir is the only one who's capable to resist. Faramir even volunteers, but Denethor mocks his quality. Denethor wants the ring because it's his people that have been killed in the wars against the orcs, so he sees Boromir as being a way to get even though Faramir stands up to it in the end. Boromir then rides off to Rivendell wearing the same clothes that he had on when he arrived in Fellowship. Now this is also why Faramir is so powerful as a character. All he wants to do is make his father proud and feel a piece of that love that he has for his brother. If he was to take the ring and give it to him, this would obviously mean a lot to his dad. However, in turning it down, he's doing one of two things. Not only is he resisting the temptation, but he's also disappointing his dad. However, in doing this, he's showing he's his own man and even more strong-willed than most would give him credit for. It's an element that Jackson added in, and it's something that's not really present in the work. There, Faramir rejects the ring and it doesn't tempt him like how it does here. However, in doing this, he's showing he's more than his brother, and it reflects the ending of Fellowship really well. Looking over a map in the cave, we then really get a lay of the land. Pointing to Minas Tirith and Osgiliath, you can see why he wants the weapon so badly. They don't have the strength to repel Sauron, and you can see why the ring might make him think he can stop them. Now in the work, it's basically just Frodo and Faramir talking, with Sam keeping silent. However, when all seems lost and like Faramir might take it, he steps forth and says, from the moment he saw it, he wanted the enemy's ring. There they're talking about Boromir, and in Sam realizing it's the ring, Faramir realizes something. It's at this point he reassures them though. For strange though it may seem, it was safe to declare this to me. It may even help the master that you love. It shall turn to his good, if it's in my power. So be comforted, but do not even name the thing again aloud. Once is enough. Now in both the work and movie, we then go into chapter 17. Titled The Forbidden Pool, we get a slight build up to it where Frodo looks out over the land. Stepping out of the waterfall, we realize why they've made their base there. there. From it, Frodo can see everything. Wondering where his friends are, they then look down with the guards, wondering what the figure in the pool is.
Shall I shoot?
In all our words together, you have not once spoken of your gangrel companion, and I let him be for the time. He could wait till he was caught and brought before me. I sent my keenest huntsman to seek him, but he slipped them. Now, as we learn, to pass into the pool is punishable by death. However, Frodo argues that Gollum knows little of men and their customs. He says he's an example of what the ring can bring and that he's been lured there by it. Bringing up Gandalf, he explains that Mithrandir would spare him. In the work, we learn Faramir thought highly of him and get more of the insight into Gollum's mind. Saying he'll throttle the hobbits if he gets the chance, he paws over the fish. Circus actually improvised the song here, with them being inspired by passages from the book. They ended up using the raw audio from set, as trying to ADR it kind of lost the spontaneous feeling. In the book, Frodo even considers letting the archers shoot him so he can finally be rid of the creature. Still though, it's pity that stays his hand, which reflects what happened with Bilbo. Now what follows in the movie is exactly like the book. Frodo lures him, appearing like a friend, and Gollum heals to his master. Presently out of the darkness, Gollum came crawling on all fours, like an erring dog called to heel. He had a half-eaten fish in his mouth and another in his hand. Now we instantly get how Frodo feels like he betrayed him. This was too much like trickery. Then leads into the torture where he screams about the rope. Eric Voss brought up in his breakdown that originally Jackson planned a much darker scene. Gollum was going to have the ends of his fingers cut off by the men, and this is why he'd be writhing on the floor. In the book, he screams about the rope again and desperately prays for Frodo's help. But the movie has the Gollum side coming out and literally caressing his back. Rubbing it with one hand, we see as this side takes over. Sam tells Frodo to put the ring on once more and just disappear, but Frodo says if he wears it again, it's going to take him. It's kind of like him knowing that last hit could be his last, and it's a great play on addiction. In the work, Faramir then lets Frodo go free and he puts him under his protection. You are under the doom of death, but while you walk with Frodo, you are safe for our part. Yet if ever you be found by any man of Gondor astray without him, the doom shall fall. In the movie, Faramir then pulls out the ring from under the shirt, and it's here he sees the truth. Wenham was apparently scared he was going to cut wood, so they practiced the scene a number of times. We see Frodo go into an almost hypnotic state and then scream no in his face. Sam then tells him they're trying to destroy it, and you see Faramir going through the same things as Boromir. He too wrestled with its destruction in Fellowship and said it was a gift. So I love how it kind of comes full circle from that and makes it appear like Faramir is going the same way. Cutting across to Aragorn, we see him racing ahead of the armies to go to Helm's Deep. Just the scope and scale of the mountains is something to behold, and with him he brings hope. Aragorn also had the name Estel, which was too Elvish for hope. We will talk about how hope's a big theme in the end, but it's important to point out here. However, it's quickly shattered when Theoden refuses to call for aid. He sees Gondor as being selfish and says they haven't helped him in the past. The folly of men lies in our division, and it's almost this that costs the characters everything. We must help each other to vanquish evil, which is something reflected in the Ents. We see them mounting up with us meeting the rest of them. Here we see the other faces of the creatures, with these being designed by Alan Lee. Lee worked on the book Fairies and reused a lot of the same styles. Jumping back to Helm's Deep, we see the women and children then making their way to the caves. Amongst these people was Elijah Wood's sister Hannah, with Alan Lee appearing amongst the men over Aragorn's shoulder. Now, I always found these moments really unintentionally funny. Legolas and Aragorn talk in Elvish and basically say they're all gonna die. Aragorn then has an outburst about how he'll die along with them, and I'd be like, you what, mate? What are you talking about? I didn't sign up for this. We also see him with a kid telling him how good his sword is. Always just thought he was like, hey, pretty good this, mate. You keep my sword, mate. That one's better, I promise. The boy is the son of Philippa Boyens, though, with Mortensen's son also cameoing here as well. It's very much the calm before the storm, though, with Theoden saying this poem.
Where is the horse and the rider? Where is the horn that was blowing?
In the book, this was set by Aragorn, and it appeared when they arrived at Edoras. There it was supposed to discuss the king, whereas here it's about Eorl the Young. The speech is also whispered and said aloud at the same time, with them layering the audio. They also shot it in slow motion and then sped it up to add this dreamlike quality. It's extremely hopeless, but the moods change by the arrival of the elves.
There is always hope.
I love how Aragorn drops that line and we then see them coming in. This is a change up from the book, as none of the elves other than Legolas were present at the battle. What it shows though is everyone coming together and showing they won't be conquered. When reading the book, I did find it a bit cowardly that the elves just kind of went to Valinor. This even happens at Minas Tirith, where they just kind of abandon us. So having their inclusion here just adds a lot and shows they won't leave us.
An alliance once existed between elves and men.
This obviously calls back to the last alliance of elves and men which opened up the Fellowship. It's recapturing that and highlighting the bond the two have. This is led by Haldir, who makes a return from Fellowship. The guy ends up dying in the end, which also highlights his sacrifice. He could have easily gone to Valinor and lived out his days in the elven version of Florida. However, he stepped up when he was needed so that everyone else would have a future. Now though I say they went to Valinor, we do learn some stuff in the appendices. Galadriel actually had the forces of Lorien fighting the orcs at this time, but it's nice they just included them in this battle. Orwyn was then gonna appear here, and we have lots of clips of her from behind the scenes. She was fighting wearing a red cloak, and yeah, kind of a shame they omitted her. Either way, that then takes us into chapter 7, which is titled Helm's Deep. It's extremely atmospheric, with the work saying the night closed around them. Legolas described what he saw. I can see a darkness. There are shapes moving in it, great shapes far away upon the bank of the river, but what they are I cannot tell. It is not mist or cloud that defeats my eyes. There is a veiling shadow that some power lays upon the land, and it marches slowly down the stream. The rain then comes in with the storm accompanying the battle. I did wonder if this was inspired by a line in the chapter, which is said by Gandalf. And behind us comes a very storm of Mordor, said Gandalf. It will be a black night. There he rode off a lot later, whereas here he's long gone. The build-up is much shorter in the book though, and it pretty much only lasts half a page. There they talk about repelling some orcs, which bought them some time. It just dives straight into it though, whereas here it's a lot more tense. I love the black armor they use as well, as it makes it feel like a shadow moves across the land. Raining, it just adds to the epicness, and we see hundreds of soldiers lining the walls. As this is going on, we cut to the caves and can see the families terrified. Two of the kids here are once more played by Jackson's own, with them also appearing in Fellowship. Jackson also cameos in the film at one point as well, with him playing a soldier on the wall. The Uruk-hai then begin chanting. Now, this was achieved by Jackson attending a cricket match with 25,000 fans. Leading the crowd, he got them all to chant, which is such a cool bit of trivia for the movie. But this shoot was absolutely grueling, with it taking 4 months to film. This involved nothing but night shoots with rain constantly battering down the cast. Jackson actually got a t-shirt printed for everyone involved that said, "I survived Helm's Deep." The crew had to create over 500 suits as well, with there being that many extras. Jackson actually noticed when they were sitting around that they'd stamped their spears into the ground. So he had this incorporated into the movie and had this happen as the warriors mounted up. However, the fighters started by a misfire even after all this build up. I love how everyone's just standing around like, are we fighting now? A great detail as well is that this arrow goes into the Uruk-hai, and then as he falls to the ground we see it sliding out the back. Arrows thick as rain came whistling over the battlements and fell clinking and glancing on the stones. Some found a mark. The assault on Helm's Deep had begun, but no sound or challenge was heard within. No answering arrows came. We see these whizzing by everyone and get a shot of an actor missing an eye. Apparently he showed up with an eye patch, but Jackson said he should remove it. Since then, the actor said he feels less insecure about it now and doesn't mind walking around without it. When I say without it there, mate, I mean the eye patch, mate. Not that he doesn't mind walking around without an eye. Just realise I worded that terribly. And we had the Uruk-hai firing crossbows back as well. These were built by the production team and designed to resemble battering rams. Gimli struggles to see over, and then he and Legolas remember to do their count. The text is filled with them just shouting stuff like 2 and 21 and 4, and it's a great way to break up the action. Everyone's just kind of huddled together and all on top of each other. This even adds to a little goof when Aragorn shouts. You can see the guy next to him's getting poked in the face with arrows. But these ladders blew me away when I first watched it, and it's such a great way to paint out a siege. Hundreds of long ladders were lifted up, many were cast down in ruin, but many more replaced them, and orcs sprang up them like apes in the dark forests of the south. You just get the feeling of how relentless it is, and how there's a constant swarm bearing down on them. I remember these bits vividly in the game, and that's exactly what it felt like. Just waves and waves of them rushing towards you, and the feeling you might might not make it out. It's in this moment we see the Uruk-hai putting in explosives which are detonated by Berserker. This was another thing I remembered in the game because these characters were an absolute nightmare. Me and my mate Tom here, we called them shirtless dudes, and every time they showed up they were right little shits. They're basically the Middle-earth version of a kamikaze pilot and someone who's been bred for one thing. Legolas aims for the neck, as he said before, that's where the armor was weak. However, due to their genetics, they've got stronger muscles there so they don't succumb as easily. The wall then explodes with them using a mix of practical and CGI effects. Miniature charges were placed along the bigature which gave it a realistic detonation. Along with this we had things like flowing water which either evaporated after or blasted out with it. This added to the authenticity, and due to the size of the bigature, the water appeared more realistic. In post-production they refined the motion and debris was used with Weta's massive software filling it with digital extras. Even as they spoke there came a blare of trumpets. Then there was a crash and a flash of flame and smoke. The waters of the deepening stream poured out hissing and foaming. They were choked no longer. A gaping hole was blasted in the wall. A host of dark shapes poured in. It's at this point the action really kicks it up a notch and they excel at everything. Gimli jumps into the crowd and then takes them on one by one. Over his shoulder Aragorn commands arrows are shot and we follow them as they hit the Uruk-hai. Legolas surfs down the steps on his shield while firing arrows. Guy is an absolute badass. When he gets to the bottom he then kicks the shield off which impales an Uruk-hai, and it's easily one of the most coolest moments in the trilogy. I know it gets a bit of backlash for being unrealistic, but I feel like due to them doing it practically rather than with a CGI model, you kind of just go with it. They end up doing that daft thing with him in The Hobbit where he runs up the bridge as it's falling apart. Looks stupid, but here it feels real as it's just in that sweet spot where it's heightened but it still feels realistic. Near the bottom stood Aragorn. In his hand Anduril gleamed, and the terror of the sword for a while held back the enemy, as one by one all who could gain the stair passed up towards the gate. The battle then beautifully balances tone and it has its highs and lows. We see Haldir dying and he slowly looks about the battlefield. It's very Saving Private Ryan and it's him seeing the despair around him. Coupled with this though is Gimli asking Aragorn to toss him, which 13-year-old me had a right laugh at that. This of course calls back to him saying no one tosses a dwarf, and a couple of tosses right here. Everything though just feels like constant escalation and we watch the stakes continue to mount up. When they retreat to the keep we then have the larger ladders coming in. Legolas then fires and snaps the rope which sends it hurtling back. It just keeps you on your toes and it means the battle doesn't feel one-sided. Now while this is happening we have intercuts to the Ents and also Faramir. We can see the ladder heading towards Osgiliath and can spot Minas Tirith in the background. This was actually removed from the theatrical cut because they thought people would just get confused. Due to its location, they worried people would think it was Helm's Deep and that the heroes were travelling there. It also wasn't going to play a big part until Return of the King, so it was easier just to remove it completely. The Ents then go to war. We see the forest coming alive, which Tolkien said was a nod to Macbeth, in that Macbeth's castle is swarmed by people who have branches as camouflage. The witch's prophecy said the woods would move before he fell, which came true in the soldiers doing that. Here though, it's the literal forest which creates such a good visual. Tolkien is a man that loved nature and hated industry, so it's almost like a fantasy of the forest fighting back. Elsewhere, Frodo arrives at Osgiliath, and at Helm's Deep we see Theoden saying this.
What can men do against such reckless hate?
This then goes on to say, "The end will not be long," said the king, "but I will not end here, taken like an old badger in a trap. Snowmane and Hasafel and the horses of my guard are in the inner court. When dawn comes, I will bid men sound Helm's horn, and I will ride forth. Will you ride with me then, son of Arathorn?" In the movie, it's Aragorn who has to convince him, and they actually give the Uruk-hai a warning. Aragorn goes to the wall and shouts that he'll spare them if they leave now, which I was always a bit like, maybe just kill them now, mate. Theoden then steps forth and says the horn of Helm Hammerhand shall sound again. This is a direct callback to the poem he uttered before. There he said, "Where now the horse and the rider? Where is the horn that was blowing?" This was the legend of Eorl the Young, who was a symbol of Rohan in its glory days. He rode out on a horse blowing the horn and valiantly fought against his enemies. He was the first king of Rohan and has since become legend. Theoden wants to recapture this and at worst go out in a blaze of glory. However, Aragorn remembers Gandalf's message and knows that there's hope with the dawn. It really reminds me of the saying they have in the trilogy, in that the night is always darkest before that. This new day brings with it hope, and thus they ride out together as the horns blast. All that heard that sound trembled. Many of the orcs cast themselves on their faces and covered their ears with their claws. Back from the deep, the echoes came, blast upon blast, as if on every cliff and a hill a mighty herald stood. But on the walls men looked up, listening with wonder, for the echoes did not die. Ever the horn blasts wound among the hills. Nearer now and louder they answered one to another, blowing fierce and free. "Helm! Helm!" the riders shouted. "Helm is arisen and comes back to war. Helm for Theoden King." I always got goosebumps reading that passage, and we see as they ride out together. His arc's incredible, and Theoden's gone from a fearful man willing to flee to someone who will meet danger head on. And with that shout the king came. His horse was white as snow, golden was his shield, and his spear was long. At his right hand was Aragorn, Elendil's heir. Behind him rode the lords of the house of Eorl the Young. Light sprang in the sky, night departed. It's so good seeing them just plough through the orcs as they sprint down the bridge. This charge of the cavalry is then mirrored in Gandalf, who we see arrive on Shadowfax. There suddenly upon a ridge appeared a rider clad in white, shining in the rising sun. This is a weapon they literally use against the dark forces. We get an amazing shot where the horses charge down the hill, and then the Uruk-hai put up their spears. However, the sun shines and blinds them, and it symbolically shows light conquering darkness. It's the perfect way to end the battle, and the chapter closes by telling us this. Wailing they passed under the waiting shadow of the tree, and from that shadow none ever came. At this point we then see the outcome of the Ents war. So good seeing this, and there's lots of great little details. I love the Ent whose head gets set on fire and he puts it out by shoving it in the water. Elsewhere we see in Osgiliath as the Nazgul comes for Frodo. This was another level that was a big part of the Return of the King game that's always stuck with me. Now Sam saves the day, but Frodo ends up pulling his sword. You might notice they used the exact same style of shot as how he first drew it on Gollum. There he was protecting Sam, but now he's doing the ring's bidding. It highlights how it has a hold on him and has turned him against his friends. When we look at it, it's really a story of addiction. Frodo has seen what could happen with Gollum, and he worries that it's happening with him. Denethor knows the ring can corrupt, and he still sent Boromir after it. In real life, we know things like cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, they're all things that are addictive and can really mess up your life. Still, we're drawn to them because they make us feel a certain way. The ring makes people feel powerful, and even though they know it's evil, they're still always drawn to it. Frodo is starting to succumb, and he's really losing himself. So it's brilliant they married these two shots, and Sam's basically the friend who's having to put up with seeing his pal lose it. He's trying to be understanding, but it's getting more and more dangerous. Sam then has a breakdown as well, and starts crying about just how bad it is. Though that line about them not being there was given as a wink to the audience, this section also comes directly from the book. And we shouldn't be here at all if we'd known more about it before we started, but I suppose it's often that way. The brave things in the old tales and songs, Mr. Frodo. Adventures, as I used to call them. I used to think that they were things the wonderful folk of the stories went out and looked for because they wanted them, because they were exciting and life was a bit dull. A kind of a sport, as you might say. But that's not the way of it with the tales that really mattered, or the ones that stay in the mind. What Sam is doing here is holding on to hope. The people in the stories could have turned back, but they kept pushing on. Sam holds on to the idea there's still good in the world and that hope can win. Just in the same way we had a box of salt at the beginning, we're seeing how he's keeping the fire burning. It's all worth fighting for, and it's an incredible moment. I know book purists often complain about this section, but when it gives us this, I think it's really worth the change. We see why Sam will always win out with Frodo, and why Gollum's way won't. Cutting to him, he looks sad hearing it, as he knows he can't connect to that. He's desperately craving the ring, and doesn't have the strength to fight and resist it. Faramir then tells him to go, even though his life will be forfeit. It's the right thing to do, and Sam says,
Captain Faramir, you've shown your quality, sir.
This brings things full circle from this.
A chance for Faramir, Captain of Gondor, to show his quality. I think not.
This clearly played on Faramir's mind, as he also added it in the cave.
Chance for Faramir, Captain of Gondor, to show his quality.
That's really why I think that scene was crucial before, and it hits so hard in the extended edition. Faramir has shown his quality to the people that matter. Frodo and Sam are going on the most difficult journey in Middle-earth, and they see him as an upstanding man. His father thought it was Boromir, but we see how that turned out. It's excellent for his character arc as well, and it shows that the hope in men wasn't for nothing. Back at Helm's Deep, we then get the Uruk-hai fleeing to the forest, which is when they're attacked by the trees. We then get some chill moments in the calm after the storm, which happens in chapter 8. Titled The Road to Isengard, we have Gimli bragging he got 43. In the book, this means he beat him by 1, whereas Legolas matches him as he kills the one between his legs. The work then follows Gandalf as he leads the way to Isengard, and we learn that no orcs survived. The hillmen were captured though, and then put to work to repair what they'd helped to destroy. It's the first real time we read Gimli and Legolas chatting, and we can see them building a friendship. They promise to ride to Fangorn and Gimli's home if they make it out alive. They then notice eyes in the tree, which is when the Ents step out. Gandalf also talks about what happened on his journey. This was the Battle of the Fort, in which he was surrounded by wolves. This might have been what they used for the warg stuff, but it all kind of leads off into Return of the King. That includes the scene with Merry and Pippin. Discovering Sarumon's weed, this sort of plays from a scene in the Fellowship. There Saruman had a go at Gandalf, saying the halfling's leaf had slowed his mind, but he was clearly also a pothead. Had it shipped out especially. Pippin also finds an apple and looks into the sky. This is a callback to the Fellowship where Aragorn threw an apple at him. He looked up thinking it had fallen from the sky, which is sort of what he's also doing here. In the extended edition, we then get a scene where they part ways with Faramir. In the book, they leave with Frodo telling him about the Black Gate and where Gollum was taking them. Faramir tries to warn him he's wicked and knows he's killed before. But there is some dark terror that dwells in the passes above Minas Morgul. If Cirith Ungol is named, old men and masters of law will blanch and fall silent. This is also a line that we get in the movie.
They say a dark terror dwells in the passes above Minas Morgul.
This hints at what's coming with Shelob, and they depart with an ominous goodbye. We then get a money shot of the group with everyone on their horses. You might notice that this actually isn't Carl Urban, and they just used his double for this shot. The battle for Helm's Deep is over though, but the battle for Middle-earth is just about to begin. It sounds very Churchillian, and you could see the Battle of Helm's Deep as being like the Siege of Vienna. There's a lot of similarities, and Jackson also said he took inspiration from Zulu. So it's interesting how these have been weaved into the narrative. Now with this being a second film in a trilogy, you kind of need to end on a dour note. Empire Strikes Back set the standard, and so many others have followed it. So we follow Gollum crawling through the woods and talking about his evil plan. He's gonna lure them to Shelob, and when they're dead, finally take the ring. It shatters the hope we've built up throughout and lets us know there's always the chance of despair. Even with the men united with Gandalf, there's still the worry it all could be lost. In that though, we get a glimmer of hope with Frodo and Sam's final interaction. Sam talks about how he wonders if they're going to be part of a story, and this is a little nod to the book.
You've left out one of the chief characters. Samwise the Brave. I want to hear more about Sam.
There he told the story of the Silmarils and realised he was also part of that story as well. He realised that even the most insignificant seeming people like Sam can play a big part. Though he might not be remembered as the ring bearer, you could argue he's even more important. He kept Frodo on the right path and helped him when all hope seemed lost. The first film was about how the littlest creatures like the hobbits can have such a grand importance to everything. I feel like that's being hammered home here as well. Panning up to reveal they're right next to Mordor, I love how this builds off the ending of the Fellowship. There we could see it in the distance, whereas now it's right on the doorstep. It's a great way to end the movie, and we close out with my favourite song from the franchise. That is Gollum's song.
Where once was light, now darkness falls.
For my research, I found they tried to get Bjork for this, but she was pregnant and declined. So instead they got Emiliana Torino, who absolutely kills it, unlike how I've killed that name there. This ends with the words, "You can never go home," and it highlights how changed the characters are. They've been through a journey that's changed them forever, and it's about to get a lot worse. And that ends the breakdown. Obviously, I'm well aware of how long this is, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching it. It really means a lot, and I hope you guys have enjoyed another mammoth breakdown. If you have, then hit the thumbs up and make sure you subscribe for our eventual breakdown of Return of the King. Oh yeah, baby, didn't come all this way for nothing, and I'm gonna start that soon. As many of you know though, we're also going to be doing breakdowns on all the Bond movies starting with Dr. No. What I didn't Dr. know though when I first signed up to that is that it's actually the 6th book in the series, so I've been powering through the other 5, so I'm just a bit more aware of the references if there are any. I'm on book 5 now though, which is From Russia with Love, and when that and Dr. No are done, I'm on Return of the King. I promise. So please drop a like on the video, and if you want to support the channel as a member of the Spoiler Society, then please click the join button. For 99 cents a month, you'll get early access to videos like this, and it goes such a long way to helping us out. If you want to get some heavy spoilers merch, you also got our t-shirt line located just below the video. You've got our Warner Brother one on there, 007 stuff, House of the Dragon stuff. You like House of Dragon, don't you? And new designs on there all the time too. Now if you want something else to watch and you haven't seen our Fellowship breakdown, then that's on screen right now. Huge thank you to everyone who checked that out. I loved all you guys' feedback, and yeah, hopefully I see you over there right after this. But out of the way, thank you for sticking through this video. I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care.